Where is Balake at?
My name's Blake.
Do you want to go to war, Balake? I'm for real. Ron.
Ron is right here, everyone. Thank you for joining me this evening for a little bit more SPTV. Hope you guys are having a fantastic Monday. I'm joined today all the way from Australia by Jason HORVATIC. Am I saying the last name right?
Bingo.
Okay, good. Well, thanks for joining me again, Jason. For those of you watching, Jason and I are both former Scientologists, both former Sea Org members, both born and raised in Scientology. And now, Jason, we had a chat a couple weeks ago, and my viewership definitely is a bit confused by you. They don't quite understand why a former Scientologist seems to be advocating so strongly in favor of Scientology. Is there anything you can explain just in the beginning here that would help people understand a little bit, or anything at all?
First of all, in going through the feedback, putting aside some of the pricks out there, there was some really good feedback, and I have reflected on that. And I actually ended up doing a blog post yesterday before we decided to do this today. So if you go to my website, jasonhorvatic.com, click on the blog, and there's the latest post is Am I a Scientologist? And I explained there sort of my position. Now, that's not really an answer here, is it? Look, when I started doing uni and so on, it was because I recognized that my greatest skills are writing and not public speaking. So it's sort of contradicting me being here, but I think they're fun. So the reason I say that is I would refer people to my blog because it is the best form of expression for me. But to try and answer it now, it has to do not with my continuing interest in Scientology is not to do with the Church of Scientology, its figures. It's not to do with the therapy, processing, psychology, spirituality, bridge side of things. That door feels closed to me. It's certainly not to do with organization and policy and so on. It's to do with the basic fundamental philosophy. And I think that Scientology potentially offers a unique metaphysical position. And I know a lot of people are thinking, what the hell do you mean? Well, that's going to take many years to really sort out, to do the study properly and the writings on it. So I have a narrow interest in Scientology, and it's not all of Scientology. When we say Scientology, we're probably, in our heads, we're probably thinking of quite different things.
So would you describe yourself as an independent Scientologist?
No, because independent Scientologists still practice Scientology, first of all. And my understanding is independent Scientologists are just like, no, David Miscavige, yes, Hubbard. But that's not my viewpoint. See, I don't call Hubbard LRH anymore. That would be an independent Scientologist thing. I call Hubbard the same as I call Nietzsche. It's just, to me, he's just an intellectual thinker. And that's all I'm interested in, his intellectual ideas.
Do you think calling L. Ron Hubbard LRH is indicative of some being stuck in some former ways of believing? I call Hubbard LRH, and I think people would argue that you seem to believe in Scientology more than I do. I'm just saying, right. I know it's a minor point, but I call him LRH because calling him Hubbard seems pretentious to me.
Well, yeah, sure. The Hubbard thing, as I said, it's from that's what you do when you write a paper. You use the last name of the person. So I sort of took that on. And for me, calling him Hubbard became a badge of honor early on in my transition out of the Church of Scientology. It was a signal to me and to others I was speaking to that I no longer consider him with this friendly title LRH. I consider him Hubbard, the same as any other thinker, Schopenhauer, Kant, Plato, whatever. Hubbard, that's what he is to me.
That is interesting, because a Scientologist would never call L. Ron Hubbard Hubbard.
That's right, yeah.
Note that.
It might have happened occasionally, but yeah, it's not a general thing, right? You call him Ron or LRH.
Yeah, a Scientologist would never, to another Scientologist, say Hubbard. Like if they're speaking to like a journalist, they might say Mr. Hubbard or Hubbard, but Scientologists would always say LRH or Ron or anyway, just an interesting point. So Jason has messaged me over the last couple of weeks with some different items that we could discuss, debate, and these are what we have ended up with, items that he felt I was positive on, he was negative on, and then the other way around. So let's see. Let's start with the first item at the top of the page. Scientology should lose its tax exemption. Okay, so I feel Scientology should lose its tax exemption. You definitely feel that it should not?
It's complicated, but yeah, ultimately, I don't think it should. Yeah, and that's a very interesting point to start the debate on. I'm probably going to get a lot of egg thrown at me, but yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, so by the way, I've brought some friends with me for backup. Okay.
Oh no, who you got?
One of my friends, his name is Yingling Lager. Okay, and he brought a couple of his brothers with him here, just so you know.
Well, it's 8 a.m. here, so I don't have any friends to support.
All right, well, I've got that advantage over you.
I have 2 kids out there in the hallway, and obviously a wife who not on her own. And we had a hell of a night last night, so that's what my support has been, and my wife's.
All right, so let me start out. I think Scientology should lose its tax exempt status because I feel like it has. Well, first of all, it obtained its status through fraud. It got its tax exemption. So, Scientology had tax exemption in the early days. It lost its tax exemption sometime in either the early 60s, late 50s. I can never really keep track of these dates. It was found, the IRS, the government determined that L. Ron Hubbard was personally profiting from the funds of Scientology. They revoked the tax exempt status. Most Scientologists, by the way, do not know that. They think that 1993 was the first time Scientology got its tax exempt status. So the fact is, Scientology got its tax exempt status back through fraud and coercion.
How is it fraud that they got it back in 1993?
Because the documents and the
story. Yeah.
Because the documents and the information that they provided to the IRS was just completely fraudulent about what Scientology truly believes and how it truly behaves. If you saw the documents, you would see they just completely lied about Scientology's honest beliefs and practices and procedures, and never mind the fact that they brought the IRS to the negotiating table through coercion and threats and harassment and abuse, and the IRS was just trying to make the pain stop. So, and also Scientology does not serve the public good. It does not. There's no public benefit to society. I mean, the best evidence of that is Clearwater, Florida. Other churches will actually do things that help other members of the community, particularly the more needy members of the community. Scientology, as a matter of basic belief, is against helping such people. They believe that giving somebody something without getting something in return makes that person a criminal. Scientology will never support efforts to help the homeless, the poor, the hungry, anything like that. If they do, it's only so that they can shoot some video and put out a press release. Scientologists, as a matter of belief, are against any such things. Scientologists don't even help their own members in need. There are Freedom Medal winners who have died poor and homeless in their cars because Scientologists will not help each other. Now, over in the UK, there's more of a public benefit test. Historically, Scientology has always been denied tax exemption in the UK. I saw something recently that made me wonder whether that had just changed. The other thing is that Scientology uses its tax exemption. Now, look, you and I are both former Scientologists. We know damn well that we, while in the organization, did not use any of these foo-foo fake religious terms that Scientology only uses when they're speaking to the courts or the presses. Auditors are not called ministers. Policy is not called scripture. I forget what they call auditing. Scientology puts on a fake front to try and make itself something that will satisfy what this country considers a valid religious organization worthy of tax exemption. Now,
that's a different argument.
I was just going to say, there is two different conversations about whether something meets the definition of a religion as laid down by whoever, and whether something is worthy of tax exemption. And it just so happens that this country has a set of rules that are different and has a test for tax exemption that's different than other countries. I happen to think that Scientology is not worthy of tax exemption. It operates for the inurement of the highest executives. And that's my position. What's yours?
Yeah, that's good. Maybe you won the debate just there. My argument is a little bit broader than that, and it probably rests on the slippery slope fallacy. Now, my understanding is that whenever Scientology's tax exemption comes under fire, the other religions do rally around to some degree. Is that, or am I wrong on that? Like, there's a bit of like, you know, like, let's support this other minority religion even if we don't like it, from the Catholic Church and so on, because they don't want the slippery slope of, well, Scientology loses it and then the Catholic Church loses it and the rest, right? Is that sort of the case?
It's in a way, and yet it turns out upon closer examination that a lot of these so-called religious leaders who seem to be coming to Scientology's defense are actually on Scientology's payroll and are not, in fact, the religious leaders they claim to be. So that's an interesting point.
Okay, so that's interesting. So, and that will sort of play in or lead to where my argument is. So I, when I came out in 2018, last year, I was sort of like, you know, finding my way. I was in a bit of a strange spot. And before I started uni, I picked up this book. It's Bertrand Russell, History of Western Philosophy. It's 1,000 pages of like dense text. It was the hardest thing I ever did at that time. And the only reason I remember this is there was a striking moment, because at the time I was still like study tech all the way, like 100% application of what Hubbard says. And there was a footnote in the preface, in the introduction or the preface, that I couldn't understand. And it took me like half an hour to like go and clear it all up and try and work out what it was. And it stuck with me ever since, just coincidentally. So basically Bertrand Russell was arguing, he was doing a very quick history of Western philosophy, and he was arguing in the Middle Ages, the battle, if you will, for power between church and state, or kings and popes. And he argues that he's talking about this sort of, you know, in the West, how at one time the popes would be in more power than the kings, and who gets to crown who and all that sort of stuff. Then he has a little footnote saying, and this is probably why, you know, in the East, you know, in Russia, they're more inclined to accept a Stalin than a something else. And I was like, what does that mean? And what he was trying to get at, my understanding is, in the Western European area, this tussle between church and state has given rise to a lot more turnover of power and distributed power, and has actually given rise to our Western societies. Whereas you'll notice in the East, we had, you know, the Tsar and you know, we had Stalin, and, you know, have Putin and so on. And there's that more state-controlled power where the church is subservient to the state. And what you end up with is here's the crux of the argument. What you end up with is tyranny and autocracy and that sort of thing. Now, in the West here right now, we're going through a phase where that church power is really under fire. Someone was telling me in the States there, you've got
quick question:
FBI.
Is the church in Russia tax exempt?
Now I'm actually talking about like Catholicism here. This is I'm talking about the history of, so I'm getting to Scientology. I'm talking more about religion in general.
Is religion in Russia tax exempt?
I'm not actually sure. I haven't looked into that.
Okay.
So someone was telling me recently, in the States there, you guys have like FBI guys like targeting, you know, priests who aren't on board with certain government policies about maybe sexuality is a particular one. I mean, I don't know. I haven't looked into this, you know, but what I like is, so in Australia, I don't know, I'm arguing here a little bit roundabout. In Australia, we have a lot of different political parties, and I like the fact that we have an Australian out there. I like the fact that we have the Greens and One Nation, and I don't want either of them to be in power, but these are like far left and far right wing parties that give different ideas to different things. And in the same way, I like church and state. I like that we have different churches saying things and different things. And
do you see separation of church and state as being consistent with religious tax exemption or inconsistent?
I'm not sure I understand how that would.
I thought that's why you were talking about this separation of church and state, that it had some relevance on religious tax exemption or something.
I'm more talking about distribution of power. So what happens if you take? What happens if you
does giving religions tax exemption help distribute power or help consolidate it?
It helps distribute power, because if you
Really?
take religion, yes, because if you take religion away from the picture, where does all the power go at Scientology and Catholicism and Islam?
Well, hold on.
Taking
away a religion's tax exemption doesn't take away religion. I mean,
No.
corporations aren't tax exempt, and corporations are the most powerful entities in the United States.
Right, because Amazon doesn't Amazon pay like no tax somehow? I'm pretty sure in Australia they paid like no tax last year.
I
or
mean,
something
they
like
pay
that.
tax. They don't pay tax if they don't show profits, but they pay tax on profits. I mean,
Yeah, and they have
I
great
would be
ways of
okay with
juggling those
all.
books.
I would be okay with all religions losing tax exemption. I'm not pay. I mean, I'm picking on Scientology a little bit for the purposes of the conversation, but I'd be okay with churches having the same tax codes as corporations. I'd be okay with that. I mean, it's worked out okay for Amazon.
That yeah, it's fair enough. That's the crux of my argument is I understand. And by the way, my inkling, and this is why I started this is complicated for me to say this as well, and that's why I've sort of been trying to find how I can describe this. But my inkling is to take it away from Scientology and all churches too. Like I feel that too. Like why should they have tax exemption? But but as you've said, obviously Christian churches, particularly in America, it's something like 50%, 40%, 60% of all aid sent to Africa is like through the Christian churches or something like that. Someone told me recently, and they were saying like hospital beds and like it's proper aid. It's not like to some executive charity, executive person. But my point is, so you're saying, if you're fine with taking all the tax exemption away. So there is power in having tax exemption. Where does that power go?
Amazon corporations are not tax exempt, and corporations are the most powerful entities in this world. I would argue more powerful than most governments. I just feel like if we're talking about should society be supporting the activities of the Church of Scientology by subsidizing them through tax exemption, I say no for the reasons that I argued. Now, are all of your reasons for the contrary just purely the slippery slope aspect of the argument?
Unfortunately, yeah, that is my argument. So I understand that is not a solid argument, but I wanted to debate it and just discuss it and broaden it out from an absolute yes, we must destroy this tax exemption from the Church of Scientology, to just be careful in the way we go about that. And that's a nuance that maybe a lot of your audience don't care about, but I do. That's pretty much where I sit on that. So it's totally fine if we chalk a win up for you on that one.
Now,
you did a good speech on that. You did a good monologue. You did. I was like, yeah, what am I going to say? That's a good one.
Now, I know somebody could come along and say, Aaron, all the other major religions have abuses and all this stuff. I do have a particular bias in that I do not truly understand other religious groups and organizations and movements the way that I do Scientology. I also don't think that you can define a religious group by the abuses. And that's not the standard I'm using to judge Scientology. Like if you talk about the Catholic Church and all the child abuse, I'm sure on a actually, I can't say I'm sure. On a per capita basis, I do not know how child abuse in Scientology, the incidence of child abuse compares to something like what everyone knows has been revealed about the Catholic Church. I just have no way to make a comparison. I guess, and again, it's still coming from a point of bias. I just know that other religious groups, particularly Christianity, including, the Catholics and Judaism, genuinely help the people in society who cannot help themselves. To me, that's what I kind of more associate religion with, is helping those who cannot help themselves. And Scientology as a principle, as a fundamental guiding principle, is against such work to the extent that they don't even help their own members unless you can pay for the help. And I just go, that's not worthy of tax exemption. That's just where I stand on it.
Sure. And I have personal experience with that, receiving that. Lack of help. But I think it really does come down that through your whole monologue speech, that was the thing that really grabbed me, because I can't argue with that. Scientology is there to make the able more able, and we think that what I said about hospital beds in Africa, that's not to help the able, that's to help the disabled, temporarily or not. And that's a killer argument you've got there, and I would just juxtapose it with the slippery slope argument from my side. Most people probably agree with you on that, but I think it's an interesting nuance.
Okay, cool. I'll highlight that one and we'll move on to the next. This is an interesting, which one would you like to take next?
Yeah, let's do that one. This is one of the fun ones, I think.
This one?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Aaron's Scientology experience is more typical than Jason's. I told you in the beginning, I'm not sure I said that. I'm not sure I totally know what that means, but what do you mean by it? Where do you want to go with this?
Well, I was trying to write a funny sort of, question to analyze, but what I'm trying to get at here is what is that? What is the typical Scientology experience? Is it us? Because I don't think either of us. Yeah.
Why does it matter? Like, what's the relevance to this question?
Well, yourself, Leah Remini, Mike Rinder, and Chris Shelton and John Atack and the principal commentators on Scientology hold, in my opinion, more power than the Church of Scientology in public discourse. Not necessarily legal power and so on, but you guys really have the reins of the narrative right now, which is interesting. Like someone pointed out, your audience is 7 times bigger than active Scientologists. Like that's power, in public discourse. So one thing about yourself and Leah and Mike, in particular, and you guys would be the 3 biggest players. Would there be other players out there who have like big audiences like you guys, yourself and Leah and Mike?
There's Mark Headley, Claire Headley.
Also RTC, ex-RTC. So my point is, what gets said about Scientology, a lot of the things you guys are saying, I think are less typical than even you believe. And I think that a lot of what percentage of your audience is actually former Scientologists and what percentages are onlookers? Do you have any inkling?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean,
no, yeah.
I guess 10% or less are actually former Scientologists.
Okay. So
that would be a huge number. I mean, 5% or less.
Right. So there's a lot of people looking who are coming to you for the gist of what Scientology is to some degree. And what they're hearing is I think an atypical version of Scientology. And I know that might rub you the wrong way, but I put myself in that bag.
It's not like it's an insult.
Okay. Yeah.
It's true. I think you could make an argument that anyone who was in the Sea Org at all, that their experience is not necessarily typical, but we'd have to look at percentages, because I would argue that over half, I would argue that 75% of all existing Scientologists have been on staff or in the Sea Org.
Maybe existing, but what's the figure from the 90s? It's and I got this from Tony Ortega's blog a while back, but it was 1 million Scientologists roughly in the 90s. That was like the peak Scientology time.
100,000.
100,000. Okay.
That was the peak. Like active IAS,
Okay. Sorry, I'm times it by 10 for some reason. Okay. And then what about all time? Do we have any idea of how many Scientologists there have been all time? Could we say 500,000?
No, it's like 400,000 or less.
400,000
for major services, for Central Addo major services since 1954.
Really? Okay. And how many of those have passed? Like half? Because
probably half.
200,000 alive or something like that.
Okay. At best.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And how many people have, here's a question. How many people have actually spoken out against the church? Like have had a really bad experience? Not just like, oh, they pissed me off because they gave me a bad wrench interview, but like a bad experience. Like
the number of people who've had really bad experiences would be exponentially larger than the number of people who've actually spoken out publicly.
Of course. But how many have spoken out? My understanding is it's something like 1,000 or something like that. I know there's an Indy 500 list. It
couldn't be more than 2,000, right?
Yeah. That's my sort of thinking. And, I don't know if we can arrive to like 5,000. We can inflate that to 5,000.
Who've spoken out?
Who've spoken, or who have, if they haven't spoken out, but they're pissed off in some way.
Wouldn't you say anyone who left Scientology is probably pissed off?
No, that's kind of my point. So if you take 400,000 or 200,000, and then we say there's 5, let's inflate it to 10,000. Let's say there's 10,000 from 400,000. It's like.
Let me ask you a question here, because I think you're getting at a point that's different than what I thought you were getting at. Are you saying that having been a staff member or a Sea Org member is not the typical experience, or the fact that we had the people who are speaking out had such horrible experiences is not the typical experience?
Well, I think the crossover between being on staff in the circle and having the really bad experiences is pretty high, right? Like the Venn diagram, the middle bit there.
I don't
Isn't
know.
that
I'm consistently shocked at how horrible the experience of being a public is between the crush regging and the intense the manipulation is not the word, interference in one's personal life, and the constant make wrong, and the you're responsible for everything horrible we've done to you, that the registrars run on them. And I mean, I'm consistently horrified at the experiences I hear from people who are only ever public. So I don't know. But which one are you mainly going for? That the staff Sea Org experience is not typical, or that our horrible stories are not typical?
both?
Wow.
So you could add them up together and get to 20,000 if you want. But you know what I mean? Like it's still.
If you're going to try to back into this by just trying to estimate how many people have spoken out, that doesn't really work.
No, I'm not. Well, we're taking how many people have spoken out, and then we are adding factors of 10, right? So if there's 2,000 people spoken out, then we say, okay, let's times it by 10. So say there's 20,000 people who've had a bad experience. And I know I'm estimating, but either way, I don't.
Oh.
So it comes down to experience, right? I grew up, and I still know a lot of people who have been involved in Scientology who, yes, they'll say they had a bad experience with a particular person at a particular time, but in no really deeper way than I would say I've had a bad experience working for XYZ corporation, you know, when I've done warehousing work, whatever.
I got to tell Jason, I just don't know that this line of discussion is going to get to a point, because it's like, I don't care whether it's 10%, 20%, 50%, or 60% of the people whose families are destroyed by Scientology. You still have to go, what's the point?
The point is, if 200,000 people have, the point is, do you know what I'll just tell you what I think the average Scientology or the typical Scientology experience is something like Leonard Cohen's or Jerry Seinfeld's, to use public figures. They come in, they do a few courses, and then they walk away. And I think
you can't call that a typical Scientology experience when they were in Scientology for 10 minutes. And unless you want to say that is the typical Scientology experience, 90% of Scientologists are in for 10 minutes and then they leave. Jerry Seinfeld would tell you he was never a Scientologist, so that's not a great argument. But even if you go, yes, 90% of the people are in for 10 minutes, they leave, no harm, no foul, and the other 10% of the people have their lives ruined. You go, what's the point? What's the point of the argument?
The point of the argument is, for all the people who've never been in Scientology, Scientology isn't this thing that if you touch it, it's going to like burn you apart like Voldemort in 4 seconds flat. It's like the dangerous part of it is when you do continue on in there and give them personal information, give them contact details, start working for other Scientologists, and your whole life becomes wrapped around Scientologist, staff. That's when the trouble is. That's what we've had trouble with. And
okay, so but I would argue the fact that the people who are speaking out mostly and for the most part were in Scientology for decades and decades and decades, I think serves to actually prove the point. In other words, I don't think the point needs to be made that Scientology isn't this thing that you just touch it and your life is ruined. It's like, if you're in it for 10 minutes or a month or 6 months or a year, you're going to be okay. You can just leave. Like, no one's making an argument to the contrary.
I think
well, because you're saying we're the loudest voices, we have the big audiences, but we were in Scientology for like 30, 40, 50 years. So if people are listening to our stories, they're not getting the impression that if you get into this thing and do one how to start a successful marriage course, that it's going to destroy your family. I mean, who's saying that?
What comes to mind is one of Leah Remini's latest Twitter posts where she, I could pull it up, but she's, like, this isn't even an organization, and to call it a religion is, she just was like hellhammer on the entire thing, like just existing in the first place. And I mean, this might tie into the nominal Scientologist question we have. Okay. So maybe I don't mind giving you this point as well, and then we can move on to that one.
I'll drink to that.
Okay,
so let's go to this one. You can be a nominal Scientologist. I don't know what that means. So what does that mean to you?
Well, that's in name. So this is the point, and we had some people sort of put the text up last time, the comments saying, "Oh, that you mean non-denominational," or and I did a bit of googling, like, what would this be called? So it's like, what is it called when you like get raised Christian and you went to a Christian church as a kid, and you still know your priest, and you might still go to Christmas mass with your parents out of politeness, and you don't mind the general thing. The church is nice, some fancy people dressed up, but you're not actually. And you're kind of like maybe agnostic on whether the God of the Christian God really exists, but you interact with other Christians, and it's you still think that love thy neighbor is a good idea, and don't steal things and so on. But you're not a devout Christian. You don't read the Bible.
Just to try to tell if we're on the same page here so far, to me, everything you've just described is someone who was raised Christian but doesn't really believe in Christianity. If they call themselves a Christian, it's only because they were raised in it, but they're not really one.
Yeah. Well, when we say they're not really one, I don't think this is sort of the point. It doesn't have to be black and white. It's not a dichotomy. It
doesn't have to be black and white, but what you've just described for me is someone who was raised in a belief system they don't actually believe in present time. It's just part of them because it was part of their upbringing.
I don't know if we can go as far as telling them to what degree they believe the various.
I'm not telling them. I'm saying what you've just described. That's what that is to me.
Okay, well, change my description slightly to say that I don't know where they fall in the belief system. I'm just saying they're not an avid, like every Sunday they go to church and they pray, but there's still parts of it in them that they kind of like, and they because
they were raised in it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you probably could have adults who I was at the markets 2 days ago and I was talking to a guy about a Bible. I got a free Bible, my first. And I had a chat with the guy about Christianity and so on because I was curious. And, does that make me a nominal Christian? Like maybe, I don't know.
No, it doesn't.
It's just... No,
so look, but here's the thing, like the 10 Commandments says, thou shalt not kill. Believing murder is wrong does not make someone a nominal Christian. The way to happiness says brush your teeth. Believing that you should brush your teeth does not make you a nominal Scientologist. So I just literally don't know what you mean by nominal Scientologist.
Okay. So, and this is from leading on from the last question still. And I feel like, and I'm also reminded of my conversation with Chris, where I really highlighted the differences between Australian Scientology, potential differences between Australian Scientology and American Scientology. I just know a lot of Scientologists who, I'm just going to ignore the writing because I'll get distracted unless you want me to.
I'm only putting up things that don't require a response.
Yeah. I just know a lot of Scientologists who, they would still call themselves Scientologists. I've even had a discussion with some where it's like they recognize that Scientology has workability. They've seen people change in Scientology. They've seen Scientology help people with personal problems directly. They still would philosophically subscribe to the general, factors, theta mess theory version of spirituality and so on. But they're not Scientologists anymore at the same time. It's like this great, that's what I would say is a
what's the point? Like, who cares that those people exist? What is the point? I don't contest that there are people who treat Scientology the same way you just described someone that was raised in Christianity but doesn't really practice and doesn't really believe, but find some things helpful and But who's saying that those people don't exist?
Well, I wrote this question in response to a lot of the comments on me from both Chris and your video that I did, where a lot of people seem obsessed with, some people seem obsessed with what my official position is. Like, what am I still a Scientologist? Am I a covert Scientologist? Am I an independent Scientologist? Because I still argue for some points on Scientology, it's like, well, therefore you're still a Scientologist. He must be some sort of Scientologist still. And it irks me. It's like, why can't I just say I've got a background in Scientology? Why is that not allowed? So maybe I wrote it for a personal reason, but I do want to highlight again the potential differences between Australian Scientology or probably rather between American Scientology at the heart of Scientology management and the rest of the world. Because maybe we have Scientology in Taiwan, Japan, in other countries, and I'm guessing, I reckon it'd probably be similar there, where there's a lot more leeway in what you can do and be as a Scientologist or a
Why
nominal
would you think
Scientologist.
that?
Because of the look on your face. As I said before, you guys have some pretty diehard religious stuff going on over there. And from hearing the testimony,
you're talking about look, Christian,
Yeah.
when you talk about religious stuff in the United States, you're talking about Christian stuff. I mean,
fair enough. You've got Muslim stuff going on as well in a negative way, but yes, but go on.
No, but I mean, if you talk about, I don't think anyone, when I say you're talking about Christian stuff, Christianity is the majority religion in the United States. There are plenty of people who believe, I would argue incorrectly so, that this country was founded as a Christian nation. And there are plenty religious liberty advocates who would argue, for example, saying prayer in public schools and stuff. It used to be pretty common. Now it's pretty much forbidden. I'm saying you're never like the religious war. And I don't even know if there is one, but if someone wants to talk about some religious strife, they're talking about church state issues, separation of church state issues, and you're usually talking about Christianity issues. You're not talking about Scientology. Scientology is not different in the United States than it is in Europe, than it is in Australia, than it is in Taiwan. I mean, do you have any reason to believe otherwise?
I think you'll find, so I'll tell you the story that I told Chris, which is a bit of a funny story. So when I was in the Australian SOG in Sydney, we'll always know when an American Scientologist, American SEAL member would come down, because at the musters, so you've got 100 or 200 people together, and the person out the front, says, "Have you guys got that?" And the Australians kind of go, "Yeah, whatever." Like they wouldn't say whatever, but that's the implication. They have to say 3 or 4 times, like, "You got that?" I'm like, yeah, we got that. So yeah, we're Australians, like we don't care. And then you'd always know when an American comes down, because while the whole crowd in unison would sort of, well, not even in unison, just go, yeah. There'd be this one voice going, "Yes, sir!" And you'd be like, "Whoa, what the hell was that?" And it was Captain America over there in the corner doing the pack, "Yes, sir." And
okay. I'm going to argue that this is one of those things where it's more of a coincidence that it seems like it's an American thing, when really it's the closer you are to David Miscavige, the closer you are to that brand of Scientology.
That's my point. And I wouldn't say Miscavige. I would just say management in general. But because you've got all the management in America,
why would you just say management instead of Miscavige?
I don't have enough firsthand knowledge of the guy, really. I just don't know. I understand what you guys are saying, but I don't
know that you get to just wash your hands of it and say, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't, I don't know a lot of things, but the knowledge is out there. I don't think, who's been running management since 1986? I'm not good at math. 14, 23, 33. That's 37 years. Who's been running Scientology for 37 years? It's David Miscavige. Who's disappeared? Guillaume Lacerva's disappeared. Mark Yeager's disappeared. Why are we splitting hairs?
Fair enough. I won't argue the point, Aaron. It's not one I'm going to win, because I know you know a lot more about Miscavige than me. It's just not. I just don't. And this is going to sound callous, but I don't care, because I feel like you guys have it under control. You guys are running with that, and I want to do my own thing on philosophy and theology, and it's nothing to do with David Miscavige. So I just, whenever he comes up, like your videos where you have a GIF of thumbnail of Miscavige, I never click on them. They just don't interest me. It's like, or Tom Cruise. I'm just like, okay, I don't. To me, sorry,
who would interest you?
Probably no one. I don't really go in for the people side of things. I'm interested in the text. Okay. So it's, it doesn't. I don't. Oh, I realized why last time I said I didn't. I wasn't that familiar with you. Like, I didn't know you were around. I realized it's because I podcast. I'm not a YouTube person. It's only the last couple of months I got on YouTube, and then I ran into you. But I used to Google Scientology on podcasts, and you never came up.
I'm the opposite. I don't do podcasts. I only do YouTube.
That's I realized I was like, geez, Aaron has been around, and I was trying to work it out for myself. Like, oh right, it's because I'm sort of new to YouTube. I don't really, not that I'm new to it, but I don't travel it very much.
Okay. Anyway, can we move on from this? I'm not sure this nominal Scientologist point is getting much traction here. I think you can be a nominal Scientologist based on how you've described it. I don't know what the point is.
The point is it demonstrates that Scientology is separate from the Church of Scientology, and it's not all about a controlling organization, and that, you know, like we've said, you know, it's okay to believe you. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't have any objection to a lot of the basic materials of Scientology, like communication formula or theta mess theory, or you know, doing a location hall or something like that, or, you know, like,
well, when you say objection, I don't think they're like, you know, destructive. I don't believe in the theta mess theory. I think
sure.
I've never been helped by I think one time in my life I was helped by a locational. It's
okay.
Like when you say I don't object to them, like, you're not destroying families with a locational. You're not destroying families with the theory.
So if you met someone like me on the street who was like, oh, you know, I kind of like this part of Scientology and this part of Scientology, would you go? I know you wouldn't, but I feel like some of your audience would. You'd be like, oh my God, you're a Scientologist and you believe in, you know, you can see from some of the comments from people, it's like, oh, because I still have an interest in some of Scientology, therefore I'm on board with pedophilic cover-ups. It's like, where's the stretch of the imagination here? And I know you're probably going to say, who cares what a few comments make? And, you know, you're probably right, but I wanted to discuss the point.
Okay. All right.
I mean, here you go. There's a person here, right? You know, why not split the difference?
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to read it. You read it out.
Why not split the difference and admit Scientology is abusive and whack, but Captain Bill had the real tech?
Well, he's saying the Church of Scientology is abusive and whack. Yeah, you know, it's, you know.
Well, Captain Bill, do you know who Captain Bill is?
Yeah. He claimed that Hubbard said at this point, you know, if something happens, you should create your own thing, and he did.
All right.
Ronzog.
All right, so let's go on to which item would you like next? I like Scientology can change.
Sure, let's go for it.
We left this on here, even though this is something that we already agree on. I think this is interesting because so many other people feel otherwise. The evidence that Scientology can change is the fact that David Miscavige has already changed so much about Scientology. David Miscavige has already convinced the Scientologists in the world that so many things L. Ron Hubbard said should never be done are in fact the things that David Miscavige is doing, and has convinced everyone is what L. Ron Hubbard really wanted all along. Plus,
like
fundraising, ideal orgs, all that shit, quickie grades, all that shit. There is also a policy letter in Scientology. It's called The Structure of Organization, What is Policy, that lays down the framework and creates an allowance for going through old policy and culling it for policies that no longer serve the interests of the organization and canceling them. And that policy applied to his own policies. He said any organization, in order not to be stale and stultified, has to have the ability to go through old policy and cancel any policy that was created out of an immediate sense of emergency to handle a situation that no longer exists. And LRH did create the framework in that policy for people, even people other than himself, to go back and cancel policy that no longer serves the organization. Interestingly enough, David Miscavige has never used that policy as an excuse to cancel policy. He's always taken the alternate route and tried to convince Scientologists that even that this what L. Ron Hubbard wrote here, that was a mistake. Some suppressive misinterpreted what LRH wanted to say, and now we're going to do it the real way. He's never actually just come out and said L. Ron Hubbard gave management the authority to cancel policy, and therefore this policy no longer serves our interest. We're canceling it. If he wanted to, he could. And so he could do it the right way, which is by simply saying we're canceling this policy. It no longer helps us. He could do it that way, or he could do it the way he's already done it, by convincing people he just found some magical memo from L. Ron Hubbard in the desk that was locked away in the attic, some bullshit like that. So we've already seen that Scientology can change. That's why I tend to place a lot of the blame for the current practices of Scientology squarely at the feet of David Miscavige. Because yes, he may be following L. Ron Hubbard policy, but it's within his power to change it if he wanted to. Again, I'm repeating myself, as evidenced by the fact that he's already changed so much of what L. Ron Hubbard said. So are we in total agreement on this or otherwise?
That is exactly right. I would extrapolate out from that into the future and say, so who knows where it could go once Miscavige, well, he's always willing. Yeah, sorry, well, I don't know what he's willing to do, but it's always possible he could change his mind at any time and cancelled his connection, for example. It was cancelled in 65, right, for a few years or something like that.
I don't think it was really canceled. It was just actually, I'm sorry, it was fair game that was never really canceled. No. The policy you're talking about. I run the risk of potentially conflating the cancellation of disconnection with the cancellation of fair game. One or the other or both was purely as a result of the Australian inquiry, where Australia was looking into these Scientology policies.
Yeah.
But do you know what I mean? Like, I can't remember if it was one or the other or both.
So I'm getting it from that Among the Scientologists book that I was talking about last time, and he talks about specifically that. So he's done his research. I assume it was his doctoral thesis. And he was saying that the disconnection policy was cancelled 100%, like was cancelled and then reinstated later, like a few years later. But the reinstatement,
statement,
putting back
reinstatement.
Yeah, reinstatement, that's the word. Was ambiguous, and he couldn't actually find the actual reference of it, which was really interesting. And that's, I know there are some people out there I've read when I was used to follow blogs and stuff on Scientology that claim that it never should have been reinstated. Like that's a fraud. Like it was actually cancelled by Hubbard, they claim, and it never should have been. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't chased down the truth of this or anything. I don't, but aside from all that, and to answer your point, fair game was then cancelled supposedly in name only. That was it was two separate cancellations. Like fair game, it was like you can no longer the use of the word fair game was cancelled.
He said you could no longer the practice of declaring people fair game.
Yeah,
and it's like,
well,
so okay.
There's two. Yeah, and I agree with you on that. That's like a little bit dodgy, perhaps.
Okay. Now I would still argue that Miscavige himself is not capable of change.
That's fine. It's not about Miscavige, though. My point is extrapolate past Miscavige. Let's say after, and we said this last time, he's what, 60 something, so let's give him 30 years. Then someone else is going to, who knows what they're going to take. And this is what my point on, can you be a nominal Scientologist, or can you be a Scientologist in some capacity, but not be an a-hole? And I really honestly think you can. And it might be difficult right now because of the current setup, but maybe in 50 years, it'll become very easy. Maybe the next person who comes along goes, fuck, this is not a good situation we're in. And just, I mean, that's a hell of a thing to for that person to have to roll back all that's happened. But
sure.
Who knows what's going to happen?
Since we both agree that Scientology can change, let's move on to the next one. Which item would you like to take up?
Let's do the OT levels of what Scientology is at core. I think that's because we spoke about this one last time, and this is probably one we ardently disagree on.
Well, I would say that this one, depending on what we mean and the context and the reason we're talking about it, I could probably take both sides of this argument. The fact that I spent my entire life in Scientology until the age of 34, did not know what was on the OT levels, did not know who Xenu was, did not know what body thetans were, did not know what the solo auditing procedures were, by itself could be taken as evidence that the OT levels couldn't possibly be what Scientology is at its core, because someone like me can even work at the Advanced Organization of Los Angeles and be a SEERG member and be a staff member and not even know it. So how could that possibly be what it is at its core? But it depends.
And we agree that less than 5% of Scientologists have done those levels. So yes,
yeah, I'd be comfortable with that, 5 or 10. But then it just becomes an almost semantic argument over what do we mean by core? Because truly, at its core, the OT levels is what Scientology is. It's just that most people never make it to the core.
Sure. Here's an interesting. So you take like the early philosophy. So my view of Scientology, and I'll tell this to people openly now. I got
you lost me at early philosophy.
I got yes, all right. I got this feedback from people that I wasn't quite standing by what I mean, and that's what my positions are, and that's partly because I'm still learning and everything's very tentative. But in this moment of time, let me say what my actual position is that Scientology is primarily a philosophy. The senior datum of Scientology is its philosophy as contained in the basics, and then a little bit in the congresses and the ACCs as well. the psychology of Scientology, which will, by which I mean processes or therapy or auditing, that is not peer review. It is an extrusion or extrapolation from the philosophy. And Dynetics, the Dynetic books, the 3 of them, a couple of years ago. So after I'd been to uni, and it really struck me. I was reading it in a different way because I wasn't a Scientologist anymore, or at least I was sort of half in, half out. And
I only have to stop you only because I'm completely not following what you're saying, and it would feel dishonest of me to let you carry on. But let me just say one thing. Let me just say one thing. Let me just say one thing.
Go. Sure.
If all Scientologists, even at the lower levels, believe that what Scientology is trying to accomplish is clearing planet Earth, and if the only way Scientology will clear planet Earth is what's on the OT levels, then we cannot argue that the OT levels are not the core of Scientology.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'll get there. And I know this part might bore you a bit. I'm speaking to hopefully a few people who find this interesting. And, you know, to some degree, Aaron, when we talk, it's always going to be like this because my interest is philosophical. It's going to be like this. But just bear with me for a minute. And
but are we making a distinction without a difference? Because if you and I agree that 90% of the people never make it to the core of Scientology and to the OT levels, are we arguing both to the 2 sides of the same coin that yes, the OT levels may be the core of Scientology, but it's not the typical experience because most people never get there?
No. Let me get there quickly. So there's a philosophy, there's a psychology extruded out of it. And then yes, we get to the OT levels where it's like that's kind of like where we want to get to, right? And all of the promises of what the OT levels deliver are in the early philosophy. You can find it all in the basics, right?
What do you mean the promises of what they deliver? What do you mean?
Well, the past life memory, being able to move things with your mind.
Oh, you mean promising what people will achieve on the OT levels?
Yeah,
full OT.
Full OT, theta mess clear. Like that's in the PDCs, the Philadelphia Doctorate course. And what a cleared planet would look like is also discussed liberally in the early materials.
Sure.
Now, here's the thing. So if you take like the 1952 era history of man, if you were to take, let's talk about the clam, right? If you were to take the clam reference out, or the Piltdown Man, because people point out that was actually, it turned out to be fraud, the Piltdown Man. So how could it be in there? Blah, blah. If you were to take all of the specifics of the incidents out, all the specifics of the OT3 incident, the story itself out, it doesn't change anything about Scientology.
I have no idea where you're going with this.
Okay. So take facsimile 1. It's a particular incident. It was
what about it? What about it?
Right. So what's important is that Hubbard says there's an incident on the whole track that we all share, and it gives us like confusion or whatever. But what's in the incident isn't that important. So my argument when we say the OT levels are core, you talk about the Xenu story. I'll say the word this time because apparently that was a big problem that I couldn't say last time.
I mean, Xenu's not relevant, but body thetans are relevant. I mean, Xenu could be Bob. Yes. No one cares. The whole point of the Xenu story is to describe where body thetans came from, how they came to be. It's the only point of the story.
Right. That's my point. So maybe we are discussing the same thing. But to me, it's about the philosophy, theology, and the obsession. Maybe we can move on to the next question, which is we shouldn't use the X word. But
okay, let's do that because let's do that because okay. Use of the X word should be constrained. Now, the X word is Xenu. So what you feel, what do you mean when you say the use of the X word should be constrained?
I don't think we should be parading it around so much.
Why not?
I have a single word argument for this one. It's called respect.
Respect for who?
It's just respect. Scientologists. Respect.
I think Scientologists would love to know that when someone gets up on stage at flag graduation and they've just finished OT5 and they say, I have had more case gain in every single session of OT5 than the entire lower bridge. I think if I, when I was in Scientology, I would have appreciated knowing that You telling me what this motherfucker's talking about is telepathically auditing some goddamn body thetans? What? That's what you're talking about right here?
Two things. First of all, last time you said Scientology is ultimately selling a lie, right? And you think that this OT stuff is a lie, like with
full OT.
Okay. I don't know. Is it? I don't know. Is the Christian God a lie? I don't know. Well, do you know the Christian God's a lie? Really? Like you should write a paper, man, because that you get some serious followers if you could really disprove it. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I think you just put some words into my mouth. I didn't.
You said. Oh, sorry. You said yes. Sorry. No, I didn't. You must have said yes. Sorry, I misunderstood.
What we're talking about specifically, see, the thing with the Christian belief or the Abrahamic religion's belief in a God is, I would argue you can't prove it or disprove it. You can disprove what L. Ron Hubbard claimed. You can disprove the fact that L. Ron Hubbard claimed that the OT levels will bring you to a point where you can causatively exteriorize from your body at will with full perceptions. We know that's not true.
How do you know that's not true?
Because that's something Scientologists don't take on faith. They say you literally can do it. And yet you or I have never met anyone who has done it ever.
I mean, I know someone, I mean, she won't talk to me anymore because I'm declared, but I know someone who I asked in my final few years of Scientology, I said, she was an OT8 class 8. I said, are you exterior, like all the time? Like, what's the go here? And she was like, yeah. Absolutely.
Right. And how did she prove it to you?
Well, I mean, now we're getting
No. Being exterior at will is something that could be proven so easily. You say you hold the fingers behind your back, and you say, if you're exteriorize and go, tell me how many fingers I'm holding up. That's elementary. We're talking about ABC 1, 2, 3. Someone can claim they're exterior. I can claim I'm Jesus. But if someone asks me to prove it, I would have to walk on water. Someone tells you they're stably exterior at will with full perceptions. You say, go tell me what the temperature is on the thermometer over there. And if they can't, then they're fucking lying to you, black and white.
This is the same argument, though, with Jesus walking on water or Moses parting the Red Sea or whatever. It's
if I tell you I'm Jesus and I can't walk on water, I'm full of shit.
Not necessarily.
Yeah, necessarily.
There is...
I'm using that as a simple example because there's a story of Jesus walking on water.
I get it.
Proving that someone is not stably exterior at will is as simple as, good, you're exterior. Where are you viewing me from right now? Oh, I'm viewing you from the corner of the room. Oh, okay, good. Well, if you chose to view me from this corner of the room, could you do that? Oh, absolutely, I could. Okay, good. Well, jump over to the corner of the room right behind me and tell me how many fingers I'm holding up. Oh, I couldn't possibly do that. Then you're full of shit.
I get what you're saying.
Well, tell me how it's wrong.
There are layers and layers to religious experience. Hubbard himself talks about the desire to prove something over the desire.
That's how he justified not ever being able to prove anything he claimed.
Sure. That's one answer to that. There's also interesting, and this is stuff I haven't fully tackled, which I want to later, but it's this concept of the physical universe was created via agreement. So one reason you can't, decide, even if you can hold a pen in midair by your mind or your spirit or whatever, that if all the other people in the room agree that it will drop, then it, we're talking about levels of power. We're getting into like spirituality and stuff, which stuff is, I'm vague on.
But Jason, you're talking about.
I'm not trying to argue this is real, right? You understand? I'm not trying to argue this is real. I'm just saying I'm agnostic on it. That's you do understand. I'm not saying.
Well, it's fine to say that you're agnostic, and that's fine. But I'm sorry if someone's standing in front of you and it's an OT8 Class A, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm stably exterior all the time," and they can't prove it to you, then they're full of shit. They're lying to you. Why would you want someone to be lying to you?
If someone, I guess I give people the benefit of the doubt. I don't know. And it doesn't bother me. If someone comes up to me and says, I have just.
Well, you can give them the benefit of the doubt, but you can't go around and be like, well, because they said it, it's true, because that's the opposite.
I'm not saying that. That's what that's what I said. I'm not saying that.
That's not true. You mentioned that. You mentioned that as an example when I said no one's ever achieved it. And you said, that's not true. I met someone who said they had. I said, I don't give a shit what they said. That's not proof of anything.
Okay. Oh, well, let me clarify. It's not necessarily true. I don't know. I'm taking what people say. If someone
you don't
says
know,
to me,
but you also have no reason to believe it's true.
Right, but I have no reason to believe it's false either.
Sure you do. It's an incredible claim with no evidence.
I am skeptical.
No, you're not. Not if you give him the benefit of the doubt. That's the opposite of skepticism.
No. When you so there's a difference between refuting something and or accepting something and being skeptical. See, to me, refuting something is not skepticism. To me, refuting something is a knowing you've made a decision. You're not being skeptical. You have your answer.
You're just saying you have not proven it to me, so I will not accept it as a fact.
Yeah, sure. I wouldn't accept it as a fact, but I wouldn't accept it as a non-fact either. You see, fact and non. No.
Those aren't the only two buckets. Those aren't the only two buckets. All I'm saying is the entire since 1954, L. Ron Hubbard has been saying that Scientology auditing can give people the power to causatively, knowingly exteriorize at will with full perceptions. The L rundowns will give you that power. People believe OT 7 and 8 will give you that power. There's not a Scientologist who's ever walked this earth who has ever given even a shred of evidence that they have that ability, even though they all fucking claim to have it. I'm sorry. Eventually you have to be like, it's not true, because if it were true, it would be the easiest thing to prove. Just like if L. Ron Hubbard wanted to prove that Scientology was the all correct and true, all he had to do was one thing. He just had to come back. The one thing, he'd have people lining up for miles outside the door of every Scientology organization.
Not necessarily.
All he had to do was come back. Fuck that.
All
he had to, I don't care what his excuse was. All he had to do to prove that Scientology could really do everything he said it could do, all he had to do was come back. Yes, he gave himself an excuse not to do so. He made up the Target 2 bullshit. But all he had to do was come back. All he had to do was come back. All he had to do was come back. So what would be more valuable? Coming back to Earth, reincarnating to Earth and proving to everybody that Scientology was true and thereby helping clear Earth, or coming up with some bullshit excuse that he was going to go off to Target 2 and I'll see you guys at some point up the line when you guys finish the job. It's like, give me a fucking break.
You are not a skeptic, Aaron. You have your answers.
No, that's
not skepticism.
Well, what's the result of skepticism? What's the result of skepticism? So, Professor,
being skeptical, being unsure.
But what's the end result though?
That's it.
No, you're not getting what I'm saying. You're not getting what I'm saying. Yeah. So what's the name of that guy who offered $1 million to somebody who could prove the supernatural? Was it Randy? Randy something? Do you know who I'm talking about?
No.
Oh, come on. You know who I'm talking about. Randy, I'm Googling this. The $1 million. Okay, live chat. I'm looking in the live chat. What is the name of the very famous guy who offered like $1 million reward if anybody could ever provide any evidence that anything supernatural was real? He was an old guy with a beard. There's been documentary. James Randi. The Amazing Randy, James Randi. Okay. I'm going to pull it up. James Randi. He's a skeptic because he's skeptical, but he's open. He's open to being proven wrong. I mean, not wrong, because he's saying, if you can bring me evidence of anything supernatural or telepathicness or telekinesis or whatever, I'll give you $1 million. And people will come forward and he shows how they do their scam. Now, if somebody showed up and actually showed the evidence, he would go, you're legitimate. So I'm not, you're saying I'm not a skeptic. I am a skeptic. I'm saying no Scientologist has ever proven it. Now, okay, maybe you're saying the problem is that I'm taking the extra step and saying, therefore it's not true. What I'm doing is just, I know, but what I'm doing is saying that after 75 years and 400,000 major service Scientology peoples, not one single person has ever shown any evidence of being able to causatively exteriorize at will with full perceptions or any of that shit. And eventually you have to go, if it were capable of being proven, it would have been proven already. I think you'd have to be an idiot to be like,
but you call me an idiot?
No, anybody. Eventually, you'd have to be an idiot to go, but maybe the next guy's got the good stuff. I mean, at what point do you go, if it could be proven, it would have been proven already?
Well, yeah. I guess I'm like a deep dive skeptic of being skeptical of skepticism.
Okay, let me come at you with this one.
Yeah.
There's only one person in the history of the Galactic Confederation who claims to have achieved the upper OT levels up to at least OT 15. If anybody could have proven that Scientology can allow you to causatively exteriorize at will with full perception, it would have been L. Ron Hubbard. And yet L. Ron Hubbard actually proved that he couldn't do it because he had to send agents and spies to infiltrate organizations that if he had the OT powers he claimed to have, sorry, too much beer. He could have just exteriorized and gone and spied on those people and heard exactly what they were saying. The evidence indicates that L. Ron Hubbard couldn't causatively exteriorize at will with full perception. He couldn't even figure out that David Miscavige was lying, feeding him false reports to get him to issue orders to remove some of his most loyal executives from post.
I'll give you that. The evidence currently doesn't support it. Are you a fan of the Big Bang Theory? Just as a very quick analogy or comparison.
Not really.
Yeah. So I'm not either, but a lot of people will say, well, that's, it's amazing how many books.
Oh, wait. Do you mean the TV show or the Big Bang Theory?
No. The actual. I don't like the TV show. That guy's boring.
I thought you meant the TV show.
No.
For me, the Big Bang Theory is intensely problematic. When I hear the Big Bang Theory, I go, that is just as ridiculous as what people say religion is.
Okay, thank you. Good. That's my point. So I got this book recently. This is just like a couple years ago. This is just a stargazing book. I was going to pull out some star charts in the middle of the night and look at the stars. But it's funny because one of the first pages, what is the universe? It has the Big Bang as fact, and it's amazing how many books do that. And it's just another example of people. When I hear the Big Bang, I'm with you. I'm just like, yeah, okay, whatever. And I'm the same with the Christian God. I'm the same with Allah. I'm the same with the Eastern idea of like we can dissolve ourselves into selfless nirvana. Like I'm not a heads explode sort of guy. I don't like when people say things, they can say anything, and I'm like, oh, okay. Like I'm just chill. And when it comes to the Scientology promises and the abilities and the exteriourness and that, it doesn't bother me if someone says I did Scientology and I'm exterior. I'm like, okay, I'm not a prove it guy. I'm like, because
in that context, I don't give a shit either. If like, right. I mean, particularly when I was in Scientology, oh my God, I'm exterior. I don't give a shit whether he's exterior or not. It's a crime it's actually a crime to tell him he's not.
Clear. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so it's not that I give a shit. To be honest, I have no patience for people making fantastic claims while being completely unable to prove them. Like I can't be bothered. I don't have the time in the day to put up with that shit. So, but it's like,
so you're probably more science than I am. That's cool. Like I'm kind of into the whole spirituality side. And okay. I'll bore you for 2 seconds with just a few quick words, but I studied something called analytic philosophy, and it's based on language being stable. And then I studied linguistics, and I understood that language change is just continual, and it led me to dismiss analytic philosophy. And a lot of science is based on the analytic sort of philosophy view of language. And I just became very skeptical, and I kind of believe there is something beyond all this physical stuff, and I don't know what it is. I don't subscribe to any particular view. I don't like saying I'm into spirituality particularly because that's such a vague term these days. Everyone who bloody does yoga is into spirituality. I don't want to be one of those people. But yeah, I believe in something. And yeah, so that's why when people say things like, oh, I'm exterior, I'm like, good for you. No problem.
Yeah.
Doesn't bother me.
Now, I want to mention something more about the Big Bang just for the hell of it, sure. Because to me, and I like when I read like, an infinite amount of mass was, down to like an infinite small, I go, are you fucking kidding me right now? But then I watch more videos and I read more shit, and they got the cosmic background radiation. And I'm like, and there's a part of me that goes, Jesus Christ, a lot of extremely smart people have been convinced that this is like the thing. And all I'm saying is that in the back of my mind, I go, that thing makes no fucking sense to me at all. But I'm not sitting here being like, oh, the Big Bang isn't real. I believe in, to me, it seems more like there's, I've seen some theories from people who were actual scientists and not just crazy people, that the Big Bang, it could be like this, this repeating thing of universes expand and then they
big
contract,
crunch, Big Bang.
and then they expand in another universe or dimension or whatever. And I go, okay, that shit makes sense to me. But again, and this is a little bit of
it just pushes it back. Where's it go?
That's what I'm saying.
Start, right?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me because it says there's something further beyond that we still don't understand, which I guess is easier to accept than going, oh yeah, this Big Bang thing, that's totally legit. Like for me, if it's legit, it should make sense. And the Big Bang just doesn't make any fucking sense to me.
Yeah. There was a philosopher of science on Joe Rogan recently. It's episode 2008. I don't remember his name.
Which episode was it?
2008. If you want to Google it. Was it Stephen C. Meyer? If that's the name. And him and Joe are just sort of joking around about like all of science makes sense if you give it one miracle, which is
Stephen C. Meyer. That's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've only listened to the first hour, and he was really, what he says in that first hour is kind of how I see. Now he's a Christian. He's converted to Christianity as a result of being a philosopher of science. And that's happened before. There are other scientists and mathematicians who convert to religion because they recognize, I believe they recognize, that when you do this math science stuff deeply enough, you go, there's something not right here. There's something missing.
Well, I always thought, I've listened to some interviews with some, some of the leading astrophysicists who've said, but these were people who started out as religious, and they said, the more I learn about the cosmos, the more I believe in my God. And I'm like, that's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I've heard physicists say in our Time podcast, the physicist saying, when he gets down to like the nitty gritty of quarks, whatever they are, like deep down, he was saying they swim in threes or something as if they were conscious. And Melvin Bragg, the producer, he's like, what? Sorry, hang on. And he said, yeah, if I was to start all my studies again, I would have studied consciousness. It's fascinating. This is panpsychism and other theories as well.
Yeah.
But so it's why I don't have a problem with all this spirituality stuff.
But the fact that you and I can endlessly come up with examples of some of the leading minds in various fields who believe different things is why, just because I believe or feel a certain way, doesn't mean I'm married to it. It doesn't mean like, you know what I mean? Like, right. It's not like I don't put my beliefs and my feelings ahead of anything, because the smartest people in the world disagree on some of the most fundamental shit. Yeah. Where do I fit into all that? Nowhere.
Well, what I want to say, Aaron, and there is this question of what am I doing here? Because I'm clearly learning still. I'm not ready for this. And I want to throw, what compelled me to come on to these couple podcasts with you? And I really want to say that, and I'm going to say it, and this might sound a bit nasty to you, Aaron, I'm sorry, and we'll deal with the fallout, but you're very quick to invalidate. You're very quick to invalidate Scientologists. You're very quick to call them names, to denigrate them, and I don't like it. I fucking don't like it. I find it rude.
Do you mean like Grant Cardone?
Yeah, or even just if like, I'm sure
Dan
if
O'Connor?
a Christian came, I don't know that one. I know Grant. But I'm sure if a Christian came up to you and said like, oh, I had a great service and I believe in God or whatever, you'd probably be like, okay, cool, water off duck's back, sort of thing. But I feel like if it was a Scientologist, your hairs, your hackles are getting up because
you've
you're on
never
a
heard
mission.
me criticize Scientologists for believing in Scientology.
I watched one video with you where Grant Cardone was on some podcast and they were trying to grill him about the OT3 story.
Yeah.
And you were like, you're like, he zoomed into his Adam apple and it like that lowbrow stuff. I just don't like it. And I know some people do, and it's very popular on YouTube. But
you're talking about something totally different right now. I said, I've never criticized a Scientologist for believing in Scientology.
Great. If you haven't, that's totally fine.
I never have.
Okay. I think that still...
I criticize Grant Cardone for being a con artist and a fraudster. The fact that he's a Scientologist is just...
incidental, is it?
What's that?
Is it incidental that he's a Scientologist, or it's like just sort of...
No, it's how I can justify talking about him on my channel. But what I criticize him for is being a con man and a fraudster.
Okay, I don't know much about the guy, so I don't
Okay.
know.
So the reason why it's funny to me to watch him squirm in an interview where he's being asked about the Xenu story is this crazy mental machinery that exists where he's not even allowed to acknowledge the truth of what's being said. So he has to squirm and interrupt the guy and cut him off and deflect. And I find that funny and noteworthy, especially since I don't like Grant Cardone.
Okay. You don't like him personally, like him, or just from what you've seen of him online?
He's a con man. He's a fraudster.
Okay. So, I had a different point. Talking about talking about like whether he's able to talk about the truth of Scientology. I'm going to make another bold claim, which you may or may not like. And when I wrote my first book, which I'm going to plug this time because someone said I should stand by my work.
Go ahead.
No, seriously. So I wrote this in 2019. It's called Scientology and Philosophy: An Experiential Overview. It's 34,000 words, so it's just a bit bigger than Animal Farm. You can get it on Amazon. And if you want to know, well, I'll tell you about it. What prompted me to write this book was when I came out, I watched The Aftermath, I watched Going Clear, I listened to Chris Sheldon podcasts and a few from John Atack, and I listened to the Fair Game podcast and some others as well, and I this is when I was really half in Scientology. I never felt that anyone was addressing the philosophy of Scientology or what I considered to be Scientology, not the OT levels, but the basic crux of the factors and the total responsibility and that sort of stuff. I maintain that to this day. No one is talking about Scientology.
No one talks about the factors. I'm the only one who's talked about the factors.
Right. And no one's talking and allow me to clarify. When I say no one's talking about Scientology, I'm talking about the essence of what I consider the subject. It's my subjective understanding of what Scientology is. And I've spoken to people both as a result of people emailing me from your podcast, which I appreciate, or just family or friends or Scientologists I know who are in complete agreement with my position that not this, but this is a rendition of it. But the basics are what Scientology is. And that there's a denigration from.
Can I jump in with a point of agreement if you don't mind?
Sure.
Perhaps I've given you the wrong impression when I say the OT levels are really the core of Scientology. Perhaps I've given you the impression that stands in contrast to the idea that the fundamental basic books are actually the core of Scientology. And I guess depending on what you're talking about and the context and everything, I think it would be fair to say that the basic books and lectures of Scientology, it's more fair to call those the core of Scientology in most circumstances than it is to call the OT levels the core of Scientology, since 90% of Scientologists have no idea what's on the OT levels.
That's right. And
I think that's a fair statement.
And thank you. I appreciate that. I'll chalk a win up for me there because I feel like I lose a lot of our debate points. And I'll
drink to that, Jason. I'll drink to that.
By the way, dear audience, I'm happy to get intellectually pilloried on these points because I'm learning. And if you think I have missed a point, send me an email. You can go on my website. There's a contact form. Send me an email and say, hey, have you considered this? I'm not interested in personal attacks. That's why I left the Church of Scientology. So if you can do that, I'm just going to ignore you. But it interests me. If you say, have you considered this or this, it actually interests me because my work is years away and I have a lot of time to decompress and to study, and I might change my direction if someone has a valid point. Can you give people your website? HORVATIC.com. If you just Google my name, as it's the name written there, it's like the second thing. I think the first thing is the Amazon site where you can get the book. I think it's like $13 American or $7 Australian in paperback, where you can get like cheaper on Kindle or whatever. Yeah, like I'm like you, like I'm very happy to change my points of view. And I've deliberately engaged in tricky conversations with people privately because, including like professors of philosophy at uni and whatnot, because I'm trying to like almost goad people to say, hey, catch me out on something, because I stand by the comment. No one is talking about the basics of Scientology. Chris Shelton has done an attempt at it. And John Atack does as well. But because I just feel they're both so blinded by rage, well, Chris is blinded by rage, that he just doesn't give it a fair go. And
can I comment?
I tell you what,
real quick?
Yeah,
I think one of the reasons people don't spend more time talking about it is nobody gives a shit.
Yeah.
But let me explain something.
Yeah.
Because in my videos, I will over and over and over, meaning I don't care how many times I've said it. When I do a video, I assume the people watching my video have not seen anything I've done before. I explain very frequently the most fundamental beliefs of Scientology, but you can do that in 2 minutes. It doesn't require discussing Dianetics 55 and the history of man and science of survival and Dianetics and a new slant on life. It doesn't, like, there's no reason in the real world to discuss the content of Scientology's basic books and lectures. At least I haven't found a reason in all of my talking about Scientology. In my Lex Friedman interview, I cannot tell you how many Scientologists, former Scientologists, have contacted me and said, you described Scientology in a way that was so easy to understand that I've never heard anybody do that before. None of them complained that I didn't give enough shrift to the basic books and lectures. They thought I did a pretty good job explaining Scientology.
Yes. So, and that's an interesting point. And that's something that I really took on board from our interview last time, is maybe I'm extremely atypical in my point of view, that the, discussing in depth the basics and Dynamics 55 and factors and data mesh theory and all this sort of stuff, maybe I'm really unusual in wanting to do that. I will say that it's not suited to this, is it? This isn't how you do philosophical discourse generally. You generally write books, philosophy, or you have like podcasts that you've written a script for and you read the script. Like, it's philosophy isn't generally, you'll see philosophers go on Joe Rogan and whatnot, but that's because they already know and they already have their positions and now they're just sharing and riffing off those positions. But I don't have the positions yet because I haven't done the formal study yet. If you want a taste of what my thesis look like, it's different. I've changed a lot and there's a few too many. My book's a little bit overwritten. It's like there's too many italics and a lot of words start with capital letters, like logic starts with capital L for some reason. I don't know what I was thinking at the time. I put it, it's properly published. I put it through an editor and everything. But this sort of book is what I would be interested in doing my thesis on. Well, the first half, because the second half I talk about my experiences a little bit.
Jason, did you write that book while you were still in Scientology, like before you were declared?
So the quick version of my story is in late 2017, I was at AOSH, and so I had some very bad sessions, and I had some severe evaluation and invalidation in a knowledge report by one person, and it sent me for a spin. Let's not go there. I was in a bad way for a few months, and then I ended up, and to your point, no Scientologists want to help me. We'll go there. I was kind of suicidal. I don't like talking about it too much because I wonder if I really was, or if I was making it up, and I get into some weird space talking about it. I was just not in a good way. I was just sort of curled up in a ball for a few months. And, my wife would reach out to people who we had helped in local church here in Perth, or to people in the Sydney and the area where it happened, and say, look, he's just in a bad way. Can we just get him some help? Like basic help. Like, can we get someone to just give him a fucking location or something? Nothing, not a single fucking thing. And that's why I resigned from the Church of Scientology. It took me till 2020 to do it. It was 5 years. And what happened is to get help, I went to Adelaide and stayed with my nan, old Croatian lady who like cooks lavish meals, and you've never had enough food. Eat, Jason, you eat, you're skinny, eat more, and lovely garden and the rest, and a good friend there who I just decompressed to. And then when I came back to Perth, I went to a library and started just reading books randomly. And I picked up a book called Your Life is... No, not that one. In Defense of Selfishness, which I didn't realize was a book connected to the Ayn Rand philosophy. I had no idea who Ayn Rand was at the time. And in there was a caption that like a 2-paragraph takedown of utilitarianism, which is the greatest good for the greatest number philosophy. That's utilitarian ethics. Yeah. And it was a really good takedown. And I read it and I was like, hang on, that's Scientology. And Hubbard said he invented this. And that was like the click. The other click that happened was these people, imagine if these people had access to my bank accounts and could jail me and my flights. And like, if Scientology was the world government, what would have just happened to me right now? I'd probably be dead. Like I probably would have been put on the introspection rundown and just cucked it, right? So those two things clicked. So that intellectual click of the ethics, I started digging apart the ethics, and then I started listening to podcasts. And this is where I say we shouldn't next word because of respect, because I found it really hard to engage in this community because of the hostility and because of the use of the X word and so on. So I'm talking from personal experience. I really would have appreciated someone to just say it calmly, and that's why I say if you want to do a your own, playlist or whatever, whoever can do that. And if that ends up being me, I'll do it. It's just I won't do it until I've done the thesis. So it's years away. And I also like the idea. You also mentioned the idea of potentially when I'm doing the thesis, I'd have to check with who the supervisors are and whether this is kosher or not. But maybe just each week I could just turn the camera on and do a download of this is what I've read this week, and here's some interesting thoughts and things I've read, and make a YouTube series like that. Might be interesting to some people.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, so I was so frustrated with, like, I started understanding, like, oh, there's all these organizational problems and Miscavige and Tom Cruise and all this stuff. But no one, in my opinion, was answering, but this is not what I thought Scientology was. Like, I understand there's all these problems, but it's not the core of it for me. So in 2019, I wrote this book off the top of my head, just from I'd read this Bertrand Russell book, The History of Western Philosophy, and I'd listened to a podcast called Philosophize This, and a few other things, and I just wrote it. I was just like, and before self-publishing, because I didn't want any publishers to be harassed by the church, because I wasn't sure if that was going to happen or not. So I was like, I'll self-publish it so I fully own it. So I put it through the editors and typesetters and got the cover made and everything. And then I sent a message to someone I knew in Osa Anzo and said, just so you know, I'm just about to release a book. It's not a critical book. It's a neutral book. It's about philosophy, and philosophy comes with critiquing and criticizing and analyzing ideas. So
you emailed some Scientology folks that?
I emailed I called the CLO to get a hold of the COOSA, because when I was in the Sea Org, I used to play we used to play in the Bosun's Party. We were the band. I was guitar, and the COOSA's husband was the bass guy, and he was very good. So I knew her personally, but she was on mission or something. So I spoke to someone else there who I also knew quite well, because I was in the Sea Org with these people. And their position on it was that they wanted a copy for approval. And I said, you don't want a copy, because if you get a copy, whether you approve it or not, you've just demonstrated that I don't have free speech as a Scientologist. So I made a whole argument about free speech. And they just kept insisting. And I said, I'll send you the preface via PDF, but I'm not sending you the whole thing, because I didn't trust anyone to have a whole copy of the PDF. Like, they might then just put it on the internet, and then, that sucks. There was a lot of work. Like, and there was a tricky time to write it too, mentally. So then I just basically said, well, give me a ComEv, because AO thing that happened, I reckon a lot of people are probably thinking that my book is about that, but it's not. But I'm pissed off with that anyway. So give me the ComEv on the book and what happened in the AO. And so they did. And it took a long time to come back because COVID happened and everything. And we had
that book what you got declared for?
Well, so they were so standoffish with me that they wouldn't give me a copy of the ComEv findings and recs, which pissed me off. I'm like, so
but at that point, to your knowledge, you're being ComEv'd for writing the book?
No, I requested a ComEv.
Same thing. Same thing. Doesn't matter. Same thing.
No. Well,
yeah. You can request a ComEv for whatever, but
yeah, but they're not ComEving me.
Sure, they are. Just because you requested it doesn't mean they're not doing it to you.
Fair enough. And I
could say spank me, but you've still got to spank me. Come on now.
Wow. I did. How many beers you had? I did request it knowingly that, I was like, they're probably going to ComEv me. So if I request it, then I own the narrative, because I can request it for certain things. So it was a maneuver I did. It came back in 2021, and I found out from someone else who read it that it didn't tackle my AO situation at all. It was all about the book, and that really pissed me off. And B, what it said was I was declared a source of trouble type H, which is open mind, which I objected to, because if you read the open mind clause, it's more than just having an open mind. It's open mind without any hopes of gains and so on. And I was like, well, that's not me. I have that now. I didn't at the time. And then it was some people were giving me shit at uni. I've had 3 philosophy professors / tutors / lecturers give me shit about a continuing interest in Scientology, philosophy. And it felt like a lot of pressure because to me, the university was my new community. Because, one thing with my journey is it's been lonely because in some ways it would be nice to just come out and just join your position on everything, because then there's a lot more friends for me. Really, there is. And, like in looking at the comments on your video I did, it's like some people are calling me really nasty things, as bad as the church did, like PTSD, psychotic, ADHD, autistic, like, yeah, but it's like what I want to point out is I bet you if I came out with my story, like in full victim mode, I bet you those same people would be like, oh, poor guy, he's had a rough time. Let's give him some support.
Of course
it's like,
they would.
Yeah, and I find that disgusting. Those people are disgusting. It's like, because I have a different viewpoint. I'm fair game now, and the church, by the way, which hasn't fair game me, but some of your audience members did.
Calling you mean names in the live chat is not fair game.
I had an interesting few days mentally after I read it, and I won't be reading any of the comments this time because of that. Because there's obviously some raw stuff.
Well, sure, but you have to understand, and just let me interject for a moment here. We can talk all day about what is the typical experience, what is the not typical experience, how many people were on staff, how many people were in the Sea Org, how many people have had their families destroyed, how many people, whatever. The fact is that let's be honest, people aren't interested in the typical experience. Even if we take another example, NXIVM. Have you seen any of the NXIVM documentaries?
One, I think, a few years ago, yeah.
You could argue that the people who are highlighted in the NXIVM documentaries, because they were in that special elite club, because they were at the highest level, that those aren't the typical stories. Nobody cares. It's the atypical stories. It's the extreme stories. It's the outlandish stories. It's the most abusive versions of the stories that are going to get the most attention, the most airtime, the most play, because they're not typical. I mean, honestly, you could apply this to any group, any organization.
No, okay. I know, including the Catholic Church. But what we're talking about here is
no. But hold on. But the point is that the non-typical stories. Now, to be honest, your story sounds fucking horrible. So
it's a lot worse than I just alluded to. Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. You're like, oh, Aaron's story is more typical. Everyone's story is different, but your story sounds like it's just as horrible, if not worse, than mine. So, but my point is, the people, the audience who've never been in Scientology, the version of Scientology that they're most familiar with is the worst version. That's how it works. And so they don't have a lot of patience for people who feel like it's necessary to apologize for Scientology. And yet I think you would argue that I always
apologizing for Scientology, or
if they perceive it that way.
I can see it can be perceived that way. Yeah.
And I think, and if you ever find an example where this isn't true, I hope you let me know. I think you'll find that other than you not liking me making fun of people like Grant Cardone, I'm never inaccurate about Scientology. I'm never exaggerating or unfair about Scientology.
Fair enough. But you're not interested in, you just said earlier that like discussing the minutiae of, the Dunning 65 and the fact that
I'm not interested because I know no one else would be interested. What's the fucking point? Am I talking to a wall?
Disagree. That's where we disagree. I think we should clarify that statement to be there are a minority of people who are interested, just the same as a minority of people are interested in reading any number of books I have on my shelf, philosophy or whatever, right? It's like people, many books are published that like you can read the philosophy of, what's Blavatsky, or, there's the Theosophy movement in the New Age one, but anyway, yeah. Thanks, Andy. I did read that comment. Yeah. Hey, Andy, I got this one. This is a good one. This is an ESP. I got this a few years ago.
By the way, Andy Fabulous works with the Everyday Astronaut. Have you ever seen that YouTube channel? Tim Dodd, the Everyday Astronaut.
No.
He's literally going to the moon.
Oh, really?
Not Andy, but the guy that he works for. Yeah.
Yeah, wicked. Yeah, no, like I said, I'm not a, I'm a yeah, I'm. It's like a sunny day outside, and I'm like reading Bertrand Russell history. Bertrand
When I
Russell
say
history, Western philosophy,
nobody,
you know.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
You're being rhetorical. Yeah, and I want to point out that I understand though that your point, like that's the nature of the research is
It's also
that
not what
I'm
interests
doing.
me. Like, why would I sit down and discuss the true meaning of a new slant on life? I don't give a fuck.
Right, and that's fine. But would you accept that therefore you were never, to some degree, a Scientologist, or am I going to put my foot in it by saying that? Like,
No, that's ridiculous.
or
I mean, I don't give a fuck now.
Oh, okay, right, okay, yeah, because to me, if you're not interested in that stuff, then you're not a Scientologist, or you weren't. But you're saying you were back then, but now, like to me, discussing this stuff is what's interesting. You know, I want to be the old rabbi with the hat on and like, he says here this and what this, and I think it's interesting. And I've had enough people reach out to me, Aaron, from your video, from Chris's video, and elsewise, who say like, you know, like, well, first of all, Jason, you don't understand Aaron. So pull your head in. But second of all, I agree with you on like, you know, you agree with me on this stance of some people are interested in this sort of stuff. And I understand that it's, you know, we probably won't do many of these because I feel like we've about explored.
I don't mind doing them.
Just
I enjoy conversations like this. I worry that I worry that my audience doesn't, but I enjoy them, and that's why I'm doing them.
It's we're talking about different things, actually, really is the basic issue. Is we're just what we think Scientology could be is different, and that's fine. Like it's interesting to compare notes. But just to continue this, so I didn't actually get declared for this. I got declared type H, source of trouble, which means I can't do any services essentially. But people treated me like I was declared, and then I had some pressure from people at uni. So in the summer of 2021, which is our Christmas over here, your winter, I read the three Dianetics books: Original Thesis, Evolution of Science, and Dianetics. And at the end of Dianetics, there is a passage. You can go on my website and see this. The second last post, I post like a blog post like once a year. It's a foundation for Scientology. I have the quote, but basically Hubbard saying at the end of Dianetics that it would be a good idea to remove the civil rights of people who, I'll just pull it up because
who are 2.0 and below.
No, well, I'll just read it because it's not going to take me long to pull it up, and I think it's.
By the way, I have 16 super chats that require responses from.
Do you want to do those, or do you want me to read the quote?
Unless you've got your quote ready to go, I'm happy to hear it.
Yeah, here it is. So this is from Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health, page 483. Perhaps at some distant date, only the unabated person will be granted civil rights before the law. Perhaps the goal will be reached at some future when only the unabated person can attain to and benefit from citizenship. These are desirable goals and will produce a marked increase in the survival, ability, and happiness of man. I read that.
That is fascism at the risk of misusing that word.
Sure. So I read that, and I put up. So I read that newly after not having touched any Scientology materials for years. Which is, by the way, this story should give you an indication of how wildly my thesis might go. I have no idea what I'm going to find when I go back and read them with my new educated points of view. I have no idea. I suspect I'm going to try and find the positive, but I might just be like, no, this is just not okay, you know? But I read that and I put up a denouncement in February 2022. And the denouncement is, I since have taken, but the formal resignation for the Church of Scientology that's up now is an amended version of what was there because I no longer denounce it. But basically, at the time, I was disgusted by it. Like I could have had an interview with you in February 2022, and you would have found we disagreed on nothing. But since then, I took History of Human Rights last semester, and I'm like, oh, this is a little bit. I know you might think, well, how could you be okay with that quote? And I'm not. But I'm reading it now historically in the context of the Cold War and World War II. Remember, this is in 1950 when Hitler was just around recently. And someone might write something like that and go, you know what, some people shouldn't have voting rights like the Hitler followers and whatnot. And also, just on that, the father of utilitarianism, Jeremy Bentham, also had similar views on human rights, that if you're going to go for the greatest good, then it's not about individual rights. So it's That's from a book called Inventing Human Rights. Yeah. Now, I don't agree with those points of view, and I still disagree with Hubbard's statement categorically. But there's a more nuanced view I have about it, and I'm willing to at least treat it with as much fairness as I can discussion. So I got declared in November last year from that post, but also in the declare, they declare me for the book. So it's interesting that when they declared me, they sort of retroactively included the book in the declare.
They just throw all the spaghetti at the wall. They don't give a shit.
Yeah, they put something in there. I actually read declare on Chris's interview, so it's interesting if you want to.
You actually have the
I've
declare?
moved on from it. Yeah, someone sent it to me, so I have.
They
the actual,
sent you the declare?
No, they didn't send me the declare. Someone sent me a photo of the declare.
Ooh, I'd love to see that. Let's talk about that later. Okay, let's tackle some of these. Free Xenu Project. Yeah. Exactly what people are saying. The FBI targets people who don't go along with what views exactly? I just want to know the source of his statement. I don't want to spend too much time on this. Do you know an exact source?
It was a friend, and it was an offhand comment. I wouldn't put too much. Okay. It was to do with, and wasn't FBI targeting those. It was to do with FBI specifically targeting church officials, Catholic church officials, to do with transgenderism and homosexuality and so on.
Okay.
I've
never heard anything about that, just for the record. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Free Xenu Project. I have a question. If the typical Scientology experience are, for example, adults, yet church policies not only enable child sexual assault and sexual assault, what really matters here? I'm not sure.
Church policy does not enable child sexual assault.
Well, let me clarify something here.
Yeah.
Hold on. By enable, they're referring. I'll just try to give my opinion on this. They're referring to the fact that Hubbard says there's no such thing as a child, and we're all immortal spiritual beings in bodies. Okay.
That is a little bit more philosophically ambiguous.
I do not want to spend more than 1 minute talking about this.
No, it's just that wasn't my experience. And I know that some Scientology parents do that. It's an interpretation point where the children are still children. Yes, ultimately, they're spiritual beings. But I was never, I was given more responsibility as a child. I was never treated like an adult. The statement that Scientology doesn't believe in children is I think, on the parents. I don't think that's directly.
No, L. Ron Hubbard said that there's no such thing as a child is just a thetan in a small body. They don't believe in the brain development. They don't believe in maturity. They don't believe in consent. That's not like Scientology's views on. Stop. Let me finish. Scientology's views on consent would wholly be based on whatever is the law of the land. They don't believe that a child is not, like, it's purely just based on statutory stuff. It's not there's a reason why L. Ron Hubbard had 12-year-olds being his emissaries. He didn't see them as children. He saw them as thetans in small bodies.
I don't wholly disagree. I just think it's more nuanced than they don't believe in children. I think there's a little bit more to it than that. And I don't like this picture being painted of like Scientology just flat out doesn't believe in consent. I signed consent forms.
No. You have to understand what I mean by that. In the eyes of the law, someone who is underage is not capable of consenting. That is a concept that does not exist in Scientology.
That's fair enough. But that doesn't mean that therefore Scientology is okay with pedophilia. So
I agree with you. I've never met a Scientologist who was okay with pedophilia.
Yeah, I want to read this out, right? So suppressive acts. This is the suppressive acts list. I got to do it, Aaron, because this guy here. Go ahead.
So
the first two: any felony such as murder, arson, etc., against personal property, high crime in Scientology. Second one,
okay,
sexually sexually or sexually perverted conduct contrary to the well-being or good state of mind of a Scientologist in good standing or under the charge of Scientology, such as a student or pre-clear. So the idea that Scientology practices pedophilia, it's like, fuck off. You're actually
right. Let me just jump in. Let me just jump in if you don't mind. I think, and this is where people, and I used to get annoyed that people wouldn't make this distinction, but I do feel like I have a better understanding now of why people do not care to differentiate between these two things.
Mm-hmm.
Even if Scientology thinks that something is not okay, like if some Scientologist is discovered to have molested their child, that Scientologist is getting in a world of trouble.
Oh yeah.
But it will not be reported to the authorities.
That is also the same for the Jewish courts and
hold on.
for
I don't care.
Islamic
I don't
courts.
care. I don't care.
Okay.
Hold on. I don't care. Just
All right.
the six. There, people do not care about that distinction, largely because it fails to protect society from these predators. Reporting it internally and handling it internally might, to a Scientologist, be good enough, but to the real world, it's nothing. It's nothing. That person will go on to molest 10 other kids.
Maybe,
sure.
Not
I
everyone.
I don't want to linger. I don't want to linger on this though.
It's just more nuanced. Yeah. Fair enough.
Okay. Selena says, Jason, you're all over the place, make no sense, and are after Aaron's fame. I'm sorry. Okay. As an Aussie, you don't represent us at all, mate. I don't want to read mean comments. I don't want to read mean.
No, it's fine. I would prefer to read a couple because then I can actually respond. Whereas when it's in a live chat and I come afterwards, like I can't respond. I definitely don't represent all Australians. I have no problem with that. As far as me being all over the place, I recognize I have someone referred to it as a stream of consciousness and sort of way of talking. And someone also compared me to a less well-read version of Jordan Peterson, which I thought was hilarious. And I have no problem with that. And I recognize that my speech, which has nothing to do with linguistics, by the way, if there's any comments on me being linguistics major and therefore I'm good at public speaking, that person doesn't understand what linguistics is.
I've always thought you were a very cunning linguist.
Good, Aaron. Thank you very much for that. I'll let my wife know. And it occurred to me when I came out, I was like, I recognize this in me. And this sort of speech started or really accelerated exponentially after what happened in the AO in 2017. So when people pick on it, I get a little bit like, wow, okay, that's nice. Thanks for being a prick. But I recognize this in me. And it's why I decided to write books. And I recognize that this is never going to be my primary platform. It'll be as a writer. Because when I write exactly like I'm talking now. It just comes out. And then I edit and I edit and I edit and I like 20 times. And by the time I get to the end, I'm like, oh, that's what I actually wanted to say. So everything I'm saying now is like first draft Jason all over the place. And if you don't like it, Selena, fuck off.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm gonna and sorry, Selena, but you're copying a little bit of my anger or frustration at the general comments that I saw last time, because there were some really nasty people that
it's true.
Didn't appreciate.
This is the internet, I get it. Okay, Dragon Tears for me. Jason, why can't someone just be a good person without religion? I don't need a leader to behave, and I don't need a leader to behave and give my money to.
Dragon Tears, I actually agree with you, and my personal position between you and I and no one else listening here is that it's sort of beyond religion. It's like, I'm interested in spirituality, and I don't because I am interested in spirituality, but no, really I am. And at different points in time, I've even considered doing a thesis on post-Scientology philosophy, which is actually taking it like an interpretation and taking it away from religion. That's not my intention at the moment, but yeah, I'm with you.
Okay. Prue Johnson, g'day from Australia. Does anyone know where Nazanin is, or is she MIA like Shelley? Nazanin Boniati is a very successful actress. She's around.
Who's that?
She's around.
An actress. Okay.
She was a Scientologist who was the first woman selected in the audition process to be Tom Cruise's partner.
Okay.
She pissed off Miscavige, and so she got kicked to the curb, and they brought up Katie Holmes, who was on deck waiting to hit. So that's who Nazanin is. She's a very successful actress. She was in the show Homeland. I don't know if they show that down there. But okay. Roar says, Jason, what is an original idea philosophy that Hubbard did not steal or borrow from another philosopher or religion? Name 3. I'll settle for 1.
Fair enough. I'm going to answer the question in a different way. When I was fascinated with this question myself, and in my first year of university as a freshman, I was deliberately trying to prove that Hubbard stole everything from everyone else. And this was what I was going out for. And then I asked my philosophy lecturer in the philosophy of mind one day, we were having a chat outside class, and I said, and he's like a guy who's like a walking encyclopedia. Tell me, who actually, by the way, organized the anonymous protest in Perth in 2008. But there's another story there. I said, tell me, is there a philosopher in the big philosophy hitters who didn't write anything original and just took everything from other people and then just synthesized it? And he said, yes, Hegel, without skipping a beat. And then I checked that with a senior person in the philosophy department at my university, and she confirmed that same fact. Now, I haven't been able to find a citation for that, so I need to read a bit more on Hegel. But my answer for this, because I get this a lot, is like, oh, well, Hubbard took this from this. Like, yeah, like the theta mess theory to me looks very similar to Henry Bergson's Creative Evolution, 1907. Wittgenstein said, don't think, but look, or something like that, in like the early 50s, I think, before Hubbard said it. Like, and we could go on, like, every time I find a correlation, I note it down. I've got a big notepad of all the different things Hubbard is pulling from. But it doesn't matter. What's original about Hubbard is his synthesis. And my understanding, and this is where studying the basics of Scientology, the basic books and lectures, he says that frequently. It's even in the dedication to.
I've never heard him say that. Oh, you mean thinking about standing on the shoulders of other centuries of thinking men? I don't think that's what he meant by that.
Well, maybe, yeah, and that's, to be fair, and he does change
in keeping Scientology working. He says nobody has contributed anything fundamental or basic to Scientology other than him.
Well, he's talking there. He says what's missing from a lot of these other ideas is what the senior datums are and what the accentuation is. And I get his argument there, but I also get your argument.
Is there any of his senior or major or basic stable datums that he came up on his own that were unique that you can think of?
I have look this not off the top of my head, but I haven't compared them all. But I'm got to tell you that isn't as interesting as you think it is.
Okay. I don't think it's interesting at all. I just don't want. He's the one who said it. L. Ron Hubbard is the one who said nobody has contributed anything major or basic to Scientology other than him.
Yeah.
He said it. His words, not mine.
Sure. I have a different interpretation of that. But one of the things I was in touch with someone about this recently, actually, over email, one of your viewers who sent me some nice emails, and we were talking about this. But I've been also looking at, like, if my fascination with Scientology is the basics, well, then that's 1950 to 1956, really. There is some other stuff that is in the basics after that, like Way to Happiness and whatnot. But really, it's the early philosophy. And really, by 1955, it's all over, right? Because that's when he starts talking about in Creation of Human Ability. He starts talking about as a religion. Is now, that to me seems to be the change period. And then you got 1956, he does Fundamental Thought, which is like a summation and undercut. Then he's doing undercuts. And then in the early 60s, we get organizational tighten up. We get policies start coming out more frequently. We get less lectures, except for the BC, which is a private. What I'm saying, I know I'm frustrating you, but what I'm saying is I'm also fascinated.
I just don't want to linger on it for too long, but go ahead.
I'm fascinated with the concept that Hubbard himself might have become his own worst enemy as time went on, potentially. Like, so when I'm defending Scientology philosophy, don't think that I'm saying it's all of it. I might end up just taking the first 4 years and going, here, he was onto something. And then I've been trying to make a distinction recently between Hubbard's creative philosophy or his synthesis and his reactionary philosophy. When he writes a policy because something happened and he says, so therefore this, like disconnection is obviously a contradiction of Dynamics 55, but disconnection is a reactionary policy. It's not a philosophy that he has. It's a policy he put in place for whatever reason he thought that was a good idea. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Ops broke it. Or is it Ops broke IT? Ops broke it. It is not primarily philosophy. That is bull. It is historical revisionism at its core. The philosophical realities could never stand without it. What is he referring to here?
I think he's talking with historical revisionism. I think he's talking about when he's hearing Scientology, or he, she, I think that person is thinking that I'm talking about all of Scientology and particularly about Hubbard and the history of the church. So once again, I'm not that all that is aside in my research. It's not to do with the history of the church or anything like that.
Okay. Apostate Alex says, being an ex-Scientologist, how do you consider your own personal biases when trying to investigate approach the topic in an academic, impartial way?
Fair enough. Alex and I are actually potentially talking next week, by the way, which would, yeah, anyway. First of all, time. And it's one of the reasons my current plan at the moment is to finish the BA and then do a Bachelor of Letters, which is a short second degree in anthropology. So then I'll have linguistics and anthropology. And then I'm looking at currently, this always changes, so don't hold me to this. Every few weeks, I'm like, oh, I want to do this. is to do an MLA, Master of Liberal Arts in Philosophy and Theology at a Notre Dame University here in Perth or Sydney. And then the thesis. And that's going to take a long time, years, maybe a decade, because I've got family and things to do as well. And I'm hoping that in that time, a lot of the personal frustrations, if you will, it sort of becomes a distant memory. So there's a time thing. But also in terms of acknowledging biases, that's something every person who writes like on this sort of stuff has to do. Every academic has to write. I'm not an academic. Just to clarify, some people thought I kept saying that.
Take a drink, everyone.
Yeah, no, I saw that right. And I was like, no. I think they might have watched some of it. I did clarify a few times that I'm not an academic. But I'm hoping to step into that realm, at least temporarily. And I've read papers from other people, and they have to acknowledge. I mean, Chris Sheldon has to acknowledge that in his master's thesis. He does like a whole paragraph. It's like an acknowledgement of potential bias. It's like, it's not, again, Alex, and Alex and I do speak, then we can talk about this more. But that's not. You just acknowledge it and you move on. Like we were talking about this last time. Academic papers are made to be refuted and discussed, and it's not like don't think that Jason's going to write an academic paper and it's going to be authority and people are going to hold it up and go, wow, that's what Scientology really is. No, it's just another point of view. That's all.
All right, cool. Catherine Olson says, if it could be proven, we're talking about like, the exteriorization at will and stuff. If it could be proven, why would LRH make it a suppressive act to invalidate clears and OTs?
The answer to that is philosophically deep. It has to do with the creation of the universe and agreement. And we touched on it earlier, but I know trying to get into it right now is not what it basically, very quickly, he describes when you basically new to these states of existence that he's saying you get to, you kind of like a bit of a baby in that you're unsure of it, and you haven't found your feet, and it's not necessarily a state. So if it's to come along and invalidate it, then it can throw you a curveball. And I think there's some interesting counter arguments to that, but I don't think it's as simple as Catherine's putting here.
Alrighty. Freezy new project. Jason, I would respectfully ask, you keep saying that people don't matter to you. However, do you understand that without people, does philosophy matter at all? Shouldn't people be considered in all philosophy?
I really want to clarify this first point about saying that people don't matter to me, because some people accuse me of not caring about the victims of Scientology. I'm a victim of Scientology. I could tell you my story way more in depth and worse than I told on Chris's podcast. It's just I don't choose to accentuate it, and that's my free choice. And the fact that I don't go on about that sort of stuff or get into it too much is not a lack of care. It's just that you guys are already doing it. And I don't feel like I
Whoa. Who's you guys?
Well, you would give a platform, Alex, Chris, like, John A. Tech, there's Leah, Mike had people on their show. Like these dominant voices have a lot of people who have stories way worse than what happened to me, way worse. So I don't have, it's just people telling me I don't care about people. It rubs me the wrong way. It's
I
not
think
true.
they're responding to something you've said, though. I don't remember what exactly it is, but they're not just making that up.
Free X word project here is yes, he or she is referring to my. I know, right? Well, I'm trying to be respectful. He or she's referring to my comments. I don't care about the philosophy people, but sorry, my stream of conscience just thought I did want to bring this thing up about me not caring about people. Victims. That's not the case. And I even said last time I watched the documentary on Surgeon, tears. It's like just what you don't know me. Like, you know what I mean? Like what? Someone's
what did you think about that documentary? Did you think it was just a bunch of crybabies crying about fucking spilt milk or what?
No, I cried, Aaron.
Okay.
I thought it was horrendous.
All right,
really. Like, it's not, I don't want to get emotional. Can we move on? It's just not, it's not what I'm trying to do. It's not my brand. I'm not do you know how acceptable it is to say that you're a Marxist philosopher in uni circles, or you like Marxism? Marxism arguably killed 100 million people in varying applications of it. True or not, but it's still acceptable to do theoretical studies and even say, oh, I'm a Marxist at heart. But if I say, well, I'm still kind of a Scientologist at heart in some ways, philosophically, but in the early days, maybe the first 5 years or 10 years or something, then it's like Jason agrees with this stuff. I'm like, where is your thinking cap? Come on, guys. Now, but to answer this person here, do you understand that without people, does philosophy matter at all? Does philosophy matter? Like, so he or she's asking, can we separate philosophy from the people? This again just comes down to different approach. That philosophy of mind lecturer who I mentioned earlier, his entire thesis was on the inseparability of Nietzsche and his philosophy. But then other academics will come on, particularly analytic philosophers, and the people don't matter at all. It's just the text. So, I just have, again, just realize that people can, when you do work in a university like a thesis or something, you look at it through a particular lens. And usually you'll see in a thesis, the first few pages are dedicated to explaining what that lens is and the limitations of that lens. So please, you will not see a thesis from me in a decade's time that says the philosophy of Scientology. You won't see that, because that's not what someone does a thesis on.
Okay, cool. Stacey Y, the beliefs aren't the concerns. Exposing read that.
The beliefs aren't the concerns. Exposing the abuses, the extortions, the protection of criminal behaviors that need to change. I think this just goes back to the same point of, like, again, we're just looking at different lenses, and like, it's let's use Stalinism and the Soviet Union and communism and Marxism. The first thing was to bring down the Berlin Wall and these things, right? Like, that's more important, yes. But it's also very important for people to deeply study the circumstances that led rise to that philosophically, socially, governmentally, and you'll find, if you were just to Google now, you would find, I know, dozens of books, maybe even hundreds, on the birth of Stalinist Russia and Marxism, and and they will all take a different lens and approach. And one thing I really want to point out about this, that again rubs me a little bit the wrong way with these sort of questions, is I'm not saying don't do your work. I don't believe you'll ever heard me say don't do your work, or that I think your work is wrong, any of you guys. And I know you're not, that was my mistake the first time. I thought you were this cohesive community. But any of the big voices in this space, I've never said don't do your work. I'm supportive of the work, but I'm perplexed why people sort of accuse me of not, like, they're sort of suggesting I can't do my work as if it's not allowed. And it's like, why can't I do my work? Well, it's okay. It's okay. Maybe Stacey's not my audience. That's fine. I don't think you got, what now, 175,000 followers. I think, I don't think 175,000 people would read, of your audience would read my thesis. Maybe 500 would. I don't know. And that's fine with me.
All right, cool. Linda Linda Indrisi. One of those. Jason, as an Aussie Perth living tax accountant and non-practicing Catholic, your arguments and understandings of tax and religion are wrong and makes me scream.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, I grew up in a cult, so I don't know much about that sort of stuff. Joke from last time. Can I address that one though?
Sure.
What was the, sorry, because it's not there, but
I'll have
my
to
arguments
scroll up and find it.
No, that's okay. But my arguments being wrong is like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm learning. Like it's, Aaron and I we pitch this as a debate round 2, and we have the funny, the picture of the atom bomb, and it's we're laughing. Like, we had a good time after the last chat. We were laughing afterwards and beforehand. Like, it's not, we're kind of not that serious about this. We do talk about it seriously, but I'm not here. No, I hope no one ever cites me from a verbal interview, because I do just say things that, like, I think last time I said something about Jesus and capitalism, and people pulled me up on that, and I was like, yeah, no, you're right. I did say the wrong word at the wrong time, but it wasn't what the point. How I talk. This is why I say when I write, I will write Jesus was against capitalism, and then I will go and look that up properly, and then I'll clarify it and write it properly down. So it's, yeah, maybe I am saying some wrong arguments, but also I've spoken to people. There's a professor at my university who's written law and Scientology and she had some interesting things to say, and I think she'll disagree with you. So when you say you want to scream, that's on you. Like, just be willing to, maybe people have different points of view, and that's okay.
All righty. Kitty Mom Carol says, Jason, you're an academic. You like to live in theory and thought exploration. I do too sometimes, but most people view things more pragmatically. Aaron has seen the harm Scientology has done to many people, and he rails against that.
Yeah. So again, I'm not an academic, but I feel like we sort of covered that already. Like it's because Aaron and others are doing their work. I don't need to. Yes, Rebecca, start your own channel. Rebecca here says, I probably might at some point, but I'm not there yet. Again, why I came on the podcast in the first place is perhaps what is it at base? If we're going to be reductive, it's to defend Scientologists' ability to be Scientologists, separate from all the abuses of the Church of Scientology.
Do you know, I was going to say an independent Scientologist has never reached out to me asking to come on the channel, with the exception of I think one has.
Did you have them on? Or?
No, I don't even think I've responded to their email. Because it's not something that terribly interests me. Like, I would be like, I already know what Scientologists think Scientology does. Why am I going to spend hours of my time being like, now tell me what your thoughts are? I already know what their fucking thoughts are.
You're a formidable public speaker and debater. Like I have to really switch on with you, and you know, having someone like that on, you know, might just be interesting food for thought for people. And maybe if that person says one thing that you go, oh yeah, fair point, then you've explored something new and you've thought about something different. I know you look at me like it would irritate you, and maybe you wouldn't.
The independent Scientologists believe exactly what they believed in Scientology, except they don't have to deal with David Miscavige's bureaucracy. I couldn't possibly fucking care less.
Fair enough. Yeah. And I'm the same. In looking for all those podcasts on Scientology, there are a couple independent Scientology podcasts, and I couldn't get through more than 5 minutes because they were just asserting what I'd already known from my time. And so I guess that's the same sort of thing you're saying. Yeah.
Okay, Carrie says, I wonder if Jason would have enjoyed this conversation with the Aaron from the Scientology days. Well, there'd be nothing for us to discuss in the Scientology days. Scientologists aren't even allowed to discuss this shit.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I don't. I used to think like that too, but in looking over the verbal tech references recently in the definition of verbal tech, I think that Scientologists should be allowed to discuss this stuff. It's just they're not supposed to alter the actual processes and the drills and so on. But I know that the culture of Scientology is like, I had one person tell me that giving a verbal definition of a normal word, just bike or whatever, you know, that was verbal tech. You know, it's like it seems to be getting to an extreme ridiculous point. But again, the church hopefully can change it. Maybe that can be a bit different.
Yeah. Okay. Andy says, I understand Jason, but Scientologists aren't allowed to discuss Scientology. Auditing doesn't include opinions about the teachings of LRH.
That's true. So the first part we just discussed. What's the second sentence mean? Sorry, auditing doesn't include opinions
about the teachings of LRH.
Yeah, so that's sort of my stance on it now. My interpretation of verbal tech and the crime of verbal tech and so on is it applies to auditing and TRs and these sorts of things, but it doesn't apply to discussing theta theory or factors or
except like all of that is considered the tech. I mean, all the basic books are considered the tech.
And I would argue that that's a misunderstanding by the entire Church of Scientology apparatus. So that's pretty bold of me to say that, right? So you can see how I'm really going off in a different direction because technology is the art of application.
It's just that I feel that there's certain cultural elements of Scientology that we're still close enough to the life of L. Ron Hubbard that many of those cultural elements are still trickle downs from L. Ron Hubbard himself. I mean, Ray Midoff was L. Ron Hubbard's personal auditor. The ideas of what constitutes verbal tech largely comes from whatever people are subjected to justice for doing. Do you see what I mean? We still have people in management who work directly with L. Ron Hubbard. I mean, I still feel that those cultural points come from L. Ron Hubbard, but we can, you know, it almost doesn't matter.
I'm just looking at it very long term, you know, like Christianity had a Nicene Creed in like 300 and something, and it took them 300 years to really get acceptance, you know, when Constantine converted. So it's like, you know, 2,300, who knows? I mean, Scientology might not be around, it might be. I'm just saying. Yeah. It's interesting.
I get it. Okay, Keela McDonald says, please ask Jason to have a debate with Serge. That is Serge. Serge Del Mar. He has his own channel. He's been on my channel a bunch. We've known each other since we were kids at Flag. And that's all. So you can maybe he'd want to do it with you, maybe not. Maybe you'd be interested, maybe not.
I kind of feel that I said I'd speak to Alex, and I will if he still wants me to. But this is distracting me because this stream of consciousness doesn't stop after the interview. It'll take me days to decompress from this, of all the things we said, and it's just how my mind works. I'm like deeply into all this theory and stuff, and it is pulling me away from my studies. So I kind of feel that I feel like we understand each other, and your audience at least understands me, or I hope they do. And I'm happy to do one more, but at this point, I kind of want to back away and then go, okay, I've introduced myself. Now I'm going to go do the hard work.
What would you say is the main thing that made you want to do this with me?
Particularly
a second time.
Say again, sorry.
Particularly a second time.
I feel like our first interview, we both misunderstood each other for most of the interview. More me misunderstanding you, but even you towards the end, we were talking about my thesis idea, and you said, "Oh, we've all had a collective sigh of relief." So even you, like we were that first one, because we had only had a few texts, and then we spoke to each other like 5 minutes before we went live. So we were just getting to know each other. And I'm so new to this. Like I have this microphone, but I didn't plug in my feedback headphones. So I was talking to the computer, and when I watched it back, it sounded like I was shouting, and I had a pen and I was nervous. And I just saw I didn't feel like I think the nervous, and I was sick as well. And it was like, I didn't feel like the first interview got to the heart of what I thought we would be interested in discussing. And now I feel like whenever we end, I feel happy to talk to it as long as you want, but I feel like we've gotten there. And I feel like if I was to come on again, unless there's a specific reason, like what would we discuss? Because you don't want to discuss the in-depth philosophy stuff, and I'm not particularly interested in Tom Cruise or David Miscavige. So it's like, well, what will we discuss? But I am writing. I'm going to plug again. So I have a kid's book out, which I just did. It has nothing to do with Scientology. And it says things like, oh, maybe my wife illustrated it, so anyone who wants to be a prick about it can go fuck themselves. And it's like, how do we all get here? Maybe I don't know. And then it says, one idea is someone very special made it, but who could it have been? And then it says, another idea is a big explosion made everything, including us. Another idea is a rainbow serpent woke up and made us. And, it's like agnostic, pre-philosophy kids book. And I have a third book coming out in January, which is about academic esotericism, if you will. It's probably not a book your audience will enjoy. Then, anyway, the reason I told you all that is I'm writing now, I've just started the outline, a fiction book. I'm not going to say anything more because I'll give it away, and it's going to take me about 3 years to write because it'll have to be part-time. But you're going to love it, and your audience is going to love it. And they're going to be very confused by me with the fiction book I'm writing.
I love sitting down in front of the fireplace with a whiskey and a good agnostic esotericism.
Very good.
What was the word? Agnostic what?
Oh, well, I said agnostic.
Esotericism. You said agnostic esotericism. Yes.
No, that was academic esotericism. I'm railing against analytic philosophy in a book. And I've also, this book I have coming out called Defensive Philosophy in January. It's also about me trying to write an original work of philosophy. And that's why I'd come to Hubbard's defense sometimes, where I say, like, do you know how hard it is to write an original work of philosophy? Like, I write the book myself, and I'll pillage it myself. I'll write another book later on and go, that was crap. Like, it's hard, and it's not have predictions and stuff. It's interesting. I don't know. It's a little bit of a case of, if you try it yourself, you might cut him some more slack on that front. Okay. But anyway, maybe we can speak next when I'm nearing the publishing of this fiction book, because I think you'll enjoy it.
Ops Broke It says, do you think L. Ron Hubbard was first a historical? Wait, do you think that LRH was first a historical revisionist first and foremost? I mean, he was a revisionist even when it came to ancient. On time of that, he revised his own. I would go on, but I don't know what this means. Do you?
I'm not quite sure, Ops. I think you're asking about, was he revising or like taking his own interpretation of like all philosophy all the way back to ancient and then like revising it to suit his own ends? Whether he was or wasn't, again, that's what philosophers do all the time. Like, and then other philosophers come along and say, oh, he didn't read Marx properly. He didn't read Kant properly. That's a misinterpretation. So again, it's not really a point.
All right. The Lifeboat says L. Ron Hubbard was a con man whose life's work has destroyed lives and families. You come off as an apologist, right or wrong?
Yeah, look, okay. I think the only thing I'd say is the definition of apologist is interesting because there is a deep philosophical tradition of writing apologies or apologia. They would be called in olden times, or apologisms, I think. Where you defend
Is it
a
apologize?
faith. Maybe. No, but it's like an old like Latin word or something. Look, this is the book I'm actually reading at the moment. G.K. Chesterton, Orthodoxy, and it's the classic account of a remarkable Christian experience. And it's a Christian apologist book. He's talking about the Christian tradition. And it's fascinating because he's a good writer. And I like all my favorite philosophers, by the way, are writers. So I like Nietzsche and Voltaire and Goethe. And interestingly, that I still kind of like Hubbard because he's also a writer. All philosophers who don't actually write fiction books or interesting works like Kant, I have no time for. So Chesterton here is one of those writer figures. And just this whole thing of apologist as a denigration is a bit on the nose for me. It's like, I'm sure the line apologist for something, there'll be some ideology that he or she goes by.
Alrighty. Kitty Mom, Carol, I was referring to you having an academic approach to some things. Not everyone does. You may not see yourself that way. It's my opinion, having listened to you discuss theoretical concepts the way you have been.
Well, thank you, Carol. That's very nice of you. And it's nice of you to donate so much money as well.
Freezing your project. Jason, I meant no disrespect. I think I misspoke. I was responding to you, not interested in people, not that you didn't care about people. I'm just trying to understand your lens. It felt like it shifts, but it could be me.
I may be on the spectrum. I'll let that one loose. I don't know. I have an interesting upbringing and I'm my own unique person. I kind of feel like coming out of Scientology that I'm not interested in doing therapy. I think you said on Lex Friedman as well, Aaron. Like I'm happy to be me and I'm happy to be a unique person. And I've learned to sort of, would you agree, Aaron, like a big part of your time in Scientology was spent internally not accepting yourself because you've got to be better? You know, you're always out ethics or you're always, for me, it was like, wow, for me, the first 31 years of my life, well, actually really until earlier this year when once the Declare had settled down in early this year and I chilled out from that. So I'm 37 now. So it's 36 years of my life I spent in introspecting and validating myself. And I've sort of come to a point now where I just go, I'm just me and I'm an individual person and I'm fine with that. So yeah, no, that's fine. Free X project. I appreciate you responding back.
All right. Well, guys, we have reached the end of this explosive knockdown, drag out debate that you guys have all paid big bucks to come and sit ringside for. So anyway, this has been a lot of fun. I mean, I enjoy these chats. I don't, regardless of what anybody may think of them, I don't mind talking about stuff like this. So,
Sure.
I don't know, maybe it's, people have learned a bit about you. They've learned a bit about me. Yeah. That's good enough for me.
If you have something specific where you're like, oh, I wonder what Jason thinks about this idea, then we can do a short one maybe or something. I don't know, but it's not on my radar at the moment. I'm got to get back to my thing.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for hanging in there with us tonight. Thank you to everyone who watches until the very end. We'll talk to you soon or not, as the case may be.
Okay. See ya.
If you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe right here. Bye.